Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. It's Blur's Day. And I know many of you think every day is Blur's Day, but I only use it on Thursday because the week by Thursday has become quite blurry. I'm Hugh Hewitt inside the ReliefFactor.com studio. Good morning. That was very harrowing if you watched the impeachment trial yesterday. I have in my studio over my shoulder, you can see it, that my Mitt Romney license plate from Ohio in 2012 is still in my studio, and I don't think there's anyone in the audience who has more admiration for and respect for Senator Romney. I call him Governor Romney because I first got to know him when I wrote a book about him in 2006. I was his editor on the 2011 book he wrote, No Apologies, when he ran for president. I was pretty much crushed when he lost and wanted him to running in 2015 and 2016. So when I saw that video yesterday, he almost ran right into a mob that hates him. Then I saw my friend Mike Pence getting cleared out. I saw my friend Chris Coons on TV. It was very harrowing, which is why I believe it is such an assault on due process. It's very difficult to listen to non-lawyers on TV, by the way. And it's maddening to listen to lawyers who will not tell you both sides of the case. But I will tell you this, there's a reason we do not allow victims to be jurors, not only in criminal trials or civil trials, but in any proceeding. I mean, a high school student council proceeding, a college disciplinary board, a frat board. Victims do not get to be jurors. It's just a fundamental assault on basic due process. And all that we saw yesterday is evidence for the criminal trials of the 800. It's got nothing to do with Donald Trump's culpability because you'd have to go back and have a trial. It is evidence for all those 800, and they're going to talk about whether or not Donald Trump incited them. But its bottom line is none of it matters to me or 44 other Republicans. And this was, I think, the great abuse of media yesterday. And they are purposefully deepening the divisions in the country and trying to use an emotional argument to move senators who have concluded that it's an unconstitutional trial, I believe correctly, because Article 2, Section 4 says, and I quote, "The president, vice president, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors." It's called impeachment conviction clause. If they're not in office, they can't be tried. It's that simple. Judge Mike Ludig, who is the runner-up to Chief Justice Roberts to be the Chief Justice, Alan Dershowitz, many other scholars have argued it's so obvious, it's as plain as the nose on your face. Others have said it's not, including great conservative scholars like Mike McConnell and Chuck Cooper, and they are wrong. But the 44 Republicans who said, nope, no trial, are not going to change their mind because of emotional evidence intended to restoke the fears of that day. Indeed, I believe the networks should not have on anybody who was almost a victim. It's okay to have people like me and Chuck Todd. We talked about it. We weren't there. We weren't threatened, but our friends were. We would never get to sit on a jury, by the way. I've only been on one jury in my life. A judge let me be on a criminal jury when I showed up for jury duty. And at the end of it, I went and found I put up my hand. I said, hey, Judge, I was in the Department of Justice. All right. I didn't prosecute people, but I was a Department of Justice employee. And that normally will get you thrown off of a jury, especially a criminal jury. And the judge left me on because defense counsel left me on. I found him later out. I said, why'd you leave me on? He said, I was hoping that you would tick off, he used a different word, every member on the jury. But there's a reason that we have due process rules out there. Now, I discussed this with Chuck Todd yesterday. I want you to hear the discussion. And then I want to hear what you thought about yesterday. 1-800-520-1234. How did you react, not to my conversation with Chuck, but to what you saw yesterday? 1-800-520-1234, get in 1234, 1-800-520-1234, or you can watch us on YouTube. If you want to see the video of Chuck Todd and I, we are broadcasting over YouTube and on Facebook. at my YouTube channel. Here's my conversation yesterday from NBC's special with Chuck.
Hugh Hewitt, would this have happened without Donald Trump? Is that a question that will be extraordinarily difficult for those senators to answer?
I don't think so, Chuck. I think that they will be answering the question of whether or not to convict on the basis of their vote yesterday. That which was unconstitutional on Tuesday cannot become unconstitutional. Can become constitutional on Wednesday. But I have been watching this unbroken.
I mean, they didn't decree it unconstitutional, though, as Jamie Raskin pointed out.
They would have to change their mind that those 44 Republicans would have to go from viewing it as unconstitutional yesterday to viewing it constitutional today if they were to vote to convict. This was very harrowing, Chuck, and I believe all of our professionalism is tested by that. I don't take a second seat to anyone in admiration and friendship with Mitt Romney. You'll see over my shoulder in my studio, I've got my Mitt 12 license plate. I edited his book, No Apology, when he ran for president in 2012. I urged him to run in 2016. I wrote a biography about him in 2006, so that was harrowing. He's a friend. His family is friends. Mike Pence is a friend. Chris Coons is a friend. So it's very harrowing. But the professionalism has to kick in at some point where a lawyer has to remind people this is why we do not allow victims to be jurors. This is why we do not allow participants to be analysts in trials. And it's why in every other trial, Jonathan is right, this is not a legal trial, it's a political proceeding, but it's governed by the Constitution. It's why in every other trial you do not get evidence presented without cross-examination and objection. Now, the legal question you lay out, would this have happened, intimates the coming question about a case called Brandenburg, which holds you can only be convicted for incitement if you have the present intention and the present ability of calling it. And if Donald Trump intended for 15,000 people to go to the Hill, he did a very bad job of it as only 800 people broke in. Those 800 people are convicted, in my mind, beyond a reasonable doubt tonight on the basis of the evidence I've seen. But it will not be due process to them if when they are tried, their lawyer does not get to object, stand up, and talk to each witness that presents, as we are presenting right now, about their bias, their fear, their emotional connection, like mine is to Governor Romney, or Casey's is to Governor Romney. This is very difficult for people to step back from, but what Jonathan Turley has been trying to do, what Judge Luttig did, what I think all of the best arguments that have been made have persuaded and ought to persuade, it is an unconstitutional proceeding. So no matter how emotional people are tonight and how upset they are that indeed it came, Chris Coons is a pretty good friend of mine. And I see he is very, very upset tonight. And Governor Romney...
But Hugh, you keep calling this an unconstitutional process. It is not. I mean, it is not an unconstitutional process. Look, the Senate made that decision. It is not an unconstitutional process. Maybe it'll end up, if you want to take it to the Supreme Court, perhaps they could make that decision as well. But right now, in the way the Constitution governs this, the Senate has all the power to try, and they have made the decision to call it constitutional. I don't mean to pick on you here, but it is not unconstitutional. You may believe that's true. The fact of the matter is it's constitutional.
And many unconstitutional proceedings go forward and are only seen in retrospect to being constitutional. So for 25 years, I've been teaching the impeachment cases. And when Richard Nixon resigned, there was no attempt to impeach and try him afterwards, because until very recently, it was widely understood that the impeachment conviction trial, as Judge Luttig, who was runner-up to Chief Justice Roberts to become the Chief Justice, wrote in the Washington Post, it's unconstitutional. Now, there's a difference of opinion, but that they are proceeding does not in any way, shape, or form change the underlying nature of the debate. And that's a legal debate that will go on for centuries. But I'm saying the 44 who said yesterday it's unconstitutional cannot change their mind legitimately tomorrow and say, the video, which upset me, made me change my understanding of the Constitution. Or they would rightly be deemed to have a less than good grip on what the Constitution says.
Well, I would make an argument. This is not a court case. This is about deciding whether Donald Trump, whether he should be given the privilege of being able to have the responsibility of the presidency ever again, given how he acted in office in this moment. So in some ways, There is no normal court of law here that we're talking about. This isn't about a criminal trial. This really is about a political decision about whether.
I'll be right back. 1-800-520-1234. What did you make of what you saw yesterday?
This is Albert Mohler for Townhall.com. The American experiment is founded upon a presupposition, a prior commitment to an ordered liberty, an established order. That means policies. It means a covenant. In our case, it means a constitution. As of right now, the U.S. Constitution is the longest surviving written constitution in human history. It's a remarkable document. All of that came to the fore in violent events that interrupted the joint session of Congress to count the votes of the Electoral College. At the end of the day, our constitutional order proved itself once again resilient. But that doesn't take away any of the tragedy and the horror of what took place. It was an enormous stress test on ordered liberty, a stress test brought on by the President of the United States.
We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved.
It's an opportunity for the right, the left, conservatives, liberals, all Americans to repudiate political violence and reaffirm, once again, our commitment to ordered liberty. It's the American way. I'm Albert Mohler.
The Pepperdine School of Public Policy, America's unique graduate program for leaders. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
They equate believing that the election was illegitimate with treason and being an insurrectionist and so on. I don't care what you believe. I don't care what my side believes or your side believes. I care the way people act. How many Democrats believe that the election was not stolen from Hillary Clinton? The whole point of the Russian collusion lie was to prove that it was an illegitimate election. Putin won. Remember? Putin, not Trump. Telling all Americans over and over and over police are racist does not lead to fatal riots, the burning down of businesses and police cars. That does not lead to that. But this is a cover-up for the violence of the left. That's the way it should be regarded. I wish we had the male-female hour today. I apologize to you. I apologize to me. I apologize to males and females listening. I cannot control the events outside. I can only control how I react. And this is a time of crisis wherein my normal programming is deferred.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
So you're Donald Trump, and it appears you lost the election. But you're hanging by a thread. There's a shot. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give a speech, an incendiary speech. I'm going to make a whole bunch of my supporters go insane, go berserk. I'll send them to the Capitol building. They'll trash the place. The Democrats will go, oh, my goodness, I guess Donald Trump is really, really serious about believing the election was stolen. Maybe we should take a look at this. We take another look at it. The evidence is overwhelming. The election was stolen. Let's have him stay there 4 more years. Really? Oh, I know what I'll do. I'll send a whole bunch of my supporters. I'll trash the place, put a lot of negative footage up there, and Americans are going to go, you know what? If this man doesn't get 4 more years, he'll burn the whole country down, so let's keep him there. Really?
Thanks for joining me. I want to get your reactions to yesterday. You heard mine on NBC yesterday during the special on the impeachment. What do you think? Sue in Fargo, North Dakota. Good morning, Sue.
Good morning. I think this is the biggest waste of taxpayer money since the Russia collusion hoax. And I'm wondering why, if we're going against the Constitution and impeaching a former president, why we're not impeaching Obama for inciting violence against the police. I think he did that to the same extent that Trump incited violence against the Capitol.
We aren't impeaching former President Obama because that would be unconstitutional. And I don't know that. And I believe the incitement case you lay out is even weaker than the incitement case against President Trump. Look, if this was occurring during the presidency of Donald Trump, the best case for impeachment was he was negligent in his duty when the attack on the Capitol commenced. That would be the best case. But there is no, in my opinion, the opinion of Judge Luttig and other constitutional scholars, which is debated. But to me, if you can read, you ought to come to my conclusion, because it's right there in black and white in the Constitution. By the way, the Pennsylvania state constitution, and they drafted the Constitution in Pennsylvania in 1787 for the benefit of the Steelers fans. They did it in Philadelphia. So they're in Philadelphia, and the Pennsylvania state constitution is, on the table. Everyone knows what's in the constitutions of the 13 states in 1787. It says you can impeach former officials. So these very wise people who put together the most amazing constitution in the history of mankind do not include the impeachment of former officials. And people are arguing, oh, they meant it. I don't think so. Sue, thank you. Brian, Pittsburgh. How are you, Brian?
How are you? Yeah, what I'm struggling with, and I've read the Constitution, and I understand that it does not give that license to prosecute former officials so I'll leave it there. Hugh, I'm struggling with the outrageous actions of Donald Trump leading up to the riot on the Capitol. Marco Rubio tweeted out something yesterday that I thought was not noteworthy. He said that the attack on the Capitol was far worse than some may realize. Hugh, we as Republicans, and I'm a Republican, Trump last time, where's the moral outrage for Trump, who said, stop the steal, stop the steal?
Now, Brian, let me answer that because we're running out of time. I agree with you. I said that on the day of. As it occurred, I have never said anything but that. However, to continue to do this, to try and drive wedges deeper into the United States, which is already the most deeply divided since 1968, is morally irresponsible. People have made their conclusion about that. We do not have to revisit it. We do not need this show trial, which is simply an exercise in emotion, not deliberation. We need to go forward and focus on $1.9 trillion about to be spent. The Iranians are moving forward with their nuclear program. There was an attempted hack of a Florida water supply to poison an entire city. We got problems, and that to live and bathe in Trump hatred is not responsible.
Trump has earned this.
Yeah, well, you again, Brian.
Women
Brian,
be murdered.
Brian, I mean, that's not news. There's news going on. That's not news. You're just venting, and it's not good. It's all over. It's done. People have reached their conclusion. You get 30 seconds. Go ahead.
We don't look good, seemingly minimizing that before the rest of the country of Trump's outrageous.
All right, thanks. You said it, Brian. You see, you've said outrageous 4 times. I heard it the first time. The country heard it the first time. 75 million people probably agree with you. 80 million people who voted for Biden probably do. But we don't need to focus on that any more than we need to focus on anything like the Ukraine deal or any other thing that made people outrageously upset with Trump, or saying that the media was the enemy of the people or children in cages. We need to move forward at this point and stop, because this is not done out of a conviction that it will deter a future president. It's done by Democrats to divide and destroy unity in the country, which I think is completely inappropriate to their station, to President Biden's call for unity. I'll be right back. 1-800-520-1234 on The Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of The Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Birch Gold Group.
Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
I want to talk to you about where we are in the culture and in the nation right now. So talk to us. What are you thinking?
As you know, I reaffirmed my faith in Jesus Christ when I was going through this crucible of being tortured in a politically motivated prosecution by Robert Mueller. Now, I know you missed this, Eric, along with everybody else in the country, but at midnight on Election Day, the busiest news day of the year, the Department of Justice released the last unredacted sections of the Mueller report regarding Roger J. Stone Jr. And you know what they said? They never had any factual evidence whatsoever against me regarding the Russians, Julian Assange, WikiLeaks, stolen emails, John Podesta, nothing. They had nothing. Now, who releases something at midnight? So in other words, the big media outlets, CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the people who posted headlines blaring that I was a Russian agent, none of them cover this moment. It gets covered by The Guardian and it gets covered by BuzzFeed only because BuzzFeed brought the lawsuit which required the Justice Department to finally unredact this information. To take it to modern day terms, yes, I was in Washington. I spoke on January 5th. I actually never left my hotel room at all on January 6th. I wasn't on the ellipse. I didn't march to the Capitol. I wasn't at the Capitol. I was as horrified as every American to see acts of violence there.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
This is Lanhee Chen of the Hoover Institution for townhall.com. The Biden administration announced in their first week that the U.S. is rejoining the World Health Organization. But the WHO is a flawed group, one that has performed poorly while the world has struggled with COVID-19. Early on, the group was far too deferential to China, even parroting Beijing's early claim that the virus could not be transmitted between humans. Since then, an independent panel concluded that the WHO dithered in its response, waiting too long to declare an international emergency. All the while, the WHO has continued to block Taiwan's participation because of political objections from the Chinese government, despite the fact that the world has much to learn from Taiwan's exceptional response to the virus. Before rejoining the WHO, we should have demanded some accountability and reform from the group for the $400 million in taxpayer dollars we send to it each year. It looks like we'll keep on writing blank checks to the WHO, which they are more than happy to keep cashing. I'm Lanhee Chen.
The Pepperdine School of Public Policy, America's unique graduate program for leaders. Learn more at publicpolicy.edu. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
The reason that I am having trouble with the argument is the American people just spoke, and they just changed administrations. So in the light most favorable to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle here, their system works. The people are smart enough, in the light most favorable to them, they're smart enough to pick a new administration if they don't like the old one. And they just did. And he's down there at Pennsylvania Avenue now.
If you were wondering, that's not the White House legal counsel. Just in case you were wondering. That person, whether you say, oh, the American people are so wise they chose Joe Biden. Allegedly, that's Bruce Castor, who, according to reports, works for the 45th President of the United States. Why he spent time on that argument yesterday? Your job is not to praise the last election, it's to deal with the charge of incitement to insurrection. Now, I looked at this guy's bio. He has he was a prosecutor in Pennsylvania, put some very bad people away, including murderers. But what happened to him? Again, from yesterday, this is Bruce Castor talking about one of our founding fathers. Video cut 2. Play cut.
Paraphrasing the famous quote from Benjamin Franklin, who, as a Philadelphian, I feel as though I can do that because he's my founding father too.
He's my founding.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
The impeachment trial will proceed. Dun, dun, dun. Big vote yesterday. That's one headline, USA Today. Huge font, trial to proceed. Chilling video, managers open by reviving riot. And then the vote was taken, 56-44. 6 Republicans joined with the Democrats.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Thank you for joining me on this Thursday. Let me do a market check brought to you by Birch Gold. To buy gold or any other precious metal, you go to hughgold.com. To roll over a portion of your IRA into a gold or silver-backed precious metals IRA that actually has the real deal, the gold in a vault that's taken care of by Birch Gold, you go to hughgold.com, or you text my name, Hugh, to 474747. I believe in owning it. I have it in my safety deposit box, and I bought it from Birch Gold, as I think you ought to do as well. 888-888-11. Sorry, wrong phone number. HughGold.com. HughGold.com, or text my name, Hugh, H-U-G-H, to 474747. The Dow was up 61 points yesterday. The NASDAQ was down 31. The S&P off 1 point in a quiet day on the market. Overseas this morning, though, Japan, Hong Kong, England, and Germany are all in the green. They're all up. Gold is down about $1. It's at $1,841.70 right now. It's a great day. It's always a great day to buy a little gold. You do dollar cost averaging, or you roll over a portion of your IRA. Do it at hughgold.com. Back to the phones. It's Hugh Hewitt. Let's talk to Hugh in Minneapolis. Good morning, Hugh.
Morning, Mr. Hewitt.
Good morning.
Hi, and may I preface this call by a very happy Washington's birthday to you this year, as it is a prestigious day for you.
It is. It's always my 65th birthday is coming up. But what's very irritating about it this year is I'd love to go get the vaccine, and there are appointments available, but they won't give it to me because I am 10 days short. Got to draw a line somewhere. It always happens with anything. But when there are vacancies, you think to yourself, come on, guys. But any event, how are you doing? What's on your mind?
Good. You were saying that everybody watched on TV yesterday. Well, unfortunately, I have to go out and buy a new TV set because the video portion of it broke down, but I still have audio. So let's just do this the Democrat way. I technically didn't watch any TV yesterday. I only listened to the TV.
Okay.
That's Democrat logic for you.
So when you listen to watching...
That's what Mr. Former President's team needs to employ.
Well, I am not impressed with that team. I believe that they're hot when they should be cold, and they're cold when they should be hot. They should be focused on the text of the Constitution and the fact that in every trial proceeding in the country, whether criminal, civil, or non-judicial, we never let victims act as jurors, ever. Ever. You think about a college disciplinary hearing. That's not a trial either. You think about a frat hearing. You think about a newspaper, a union vote, or a union hearing, a disciplinary hearing for a teacher.
The Kavanaugh hearings.
Yeah, none of it, ever. You never let victims serve as jurors, ever.
No.
Hey, Hugh, thank you, my friend. Enjoy the cold. Let's go down to the warm. Mary Lou in Winter Park, Florida. Hi, Mary Lou.
Good morning, Hugh. Listening to the arguments yesterday, it made me think of what happens. Here's a question for you. What happens to a district attorney if they fail to convict over and over again?
Well, it depends on which district attorney they are. If they're a political appointee, they can be removed by, as yesterday, President Biden moved to to fire all U.S. attorneys, which is perfectly acceptable except for John Durham, who's also a special counsel and can't be fired by him. But all the other ones, they can fire them anytime they want. If it's a district attorney who's elected, they get to lose and lose and lose and lose until the next election. And if it's an assistant district attorney, it's up to the district attorney to decide, and often they are fired for incompetence. If they're mailing it in, they get fired.
But these people have been trying to convict Trump over and over again, and they have failed. What consequences are they suffering as a result of their failure?
Well, you could argue that Nancy Pelosi couldn't be impeached in her retirement after the Republicans sweep the House. And indeed, there will be House, but you can't. I mean, I fully expect, as they've weaponized impeachment for former officials, I fully expect a partisan Republican Congress, if it is large enough, to bring an article of impeachment against Nancy Pelosi for abuse of her speaker's gavel. We'll see. Because honestly, once you've started down this road of impeaching former officials, there's no stopping. That's why it's such a terrible idea. Thank you, Mary Lou. Kevin, Moreno Valley, California. You're up early, Kevin.
Hey, good morning to you. How are you doing this morning?
Good. Are you driving somewhere? What the heck are you doing up at 3:40 in the morning?
Oh, I'm on the way to the yard to pick up my truck to go to Lord knows where that the dispatch sends me today.
Well, good for you. You're working hard, and I appreciate you listening to me.
Hey, that's great. Thank you, Hugh. I was listening to your I forget the gentleman that you had the interview with, debating whether this was legal or not. And at the very end, you let the cat out of the bag. The only reason that this is being done is to try to keep Mr. Trump from ever running for office again. That's it.
And by the way, it won't do that. The Media Matters is
exactly,
mad.
yeah.
If he wants to run again, he'll run again. And he'll win votes of people who are mad that they attempted to stop him. And there will be no constitutional remedy, because if a Democrat he's not going to be convicted. So I tell people, this is an objective evaluation, not a political endorsement of it. I have no opinion. I'm neutral on 2024. I'll be moderating debates among Republicans. So I'm back in Switzerland. But if a Democrat, if they were to convict him and a Democrat were to sue, they would not have standing. It would be a political question. And so it's just all crazy political vindictiveness dressed up in high rhetoric.
It is putting lipstick on a pig for political theater. That's all this is. And
did you watch it yesterday?
No, being in the truck, I listen to things from time to time when I get a chance. I listen to some highlights, and the more I listen, the more I shook my head going, this is just it's just dumb. It's
very harrowing to watch. Dumb. I mean, the one thing that was harrowing was watching the vice president rushed out, and I remember Reagan getting shot, and I remember Gerald Ford getting shot at. I remember the hand grenade being tossed on the stage with George W. Bush. It's always quite harrowing when public officials, and I remember the softball field shooting. I mean, did Bernie Sanders incite that guy? We never had an inquiry. All I saw were people like Steve Scalise, who got almost killed, saying, don't blame Bernie because you got crazy supporters.
Yes, that's exactly right. Bernie Sanders was never held and should have never been held because you got some whack job who, and I think that the man's reasoning who did that was for health care. You cannot hold Bernie Sanders or any public official to a standard like that because people are unhinged.
Yeah, and by the way, you can't do it, and it could be done again and again and again, and that's why the Constitution does not permit the impeachment of former officials. And everyone who is saying, as the Wall Street Journal does this morning, that the president will never live down this disgraceful conduct are right. It will always be a part of his legacy. And indeed, as I talked with historian Andrew Roberts yesterday, it may be the only thing, as history acts like a geological pressure on your paragraph. It gets smaller and smaller the more of history that there is. His history is always going to be accused of inciting a riot. He was impeached and acquitted a second time. Instead of 3 Supreme Court justices, 54 appeals court judges, great tax cuts, good foreign policy on China and Iran, Operation Warp Speed, the Abraham Accords, all the good stuff is going to get pushed out for a while, and then it will come back with a reassessment, and it will ebb and it will flow, and it will ebb and it will flow. One of the things I talked about with Andrew Roberts yesterday is Salisbury, about whom he wrote a great book, presided over the famine that killed 1 million Indians. All right? So nobody knows that. Nobody knows. It was quite the scandal at the night. Queen Victoria presided over the Irish famine, which destroyed Ireland. People were dying, eating grass by the side of the road. And that will forever be part of her legacy. But this will too. But nobody knows. We're all going to be dead. And so, nobody knows. John, thank you, my friend. John in Arizona. Go ahead, John.
Yes, sir.
You are on the air.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. You were talking to that gentleman that was obviously a rabid anti-Trump person. He says he's a Republican. I think he said that.
Yeah, Brian's a good caller. He's called before, but he is pretty much never Trump.
Okay. And you said when you were kind of rushing towards the end of the conversation, you said, well, 75 million people that voted for Trump probably agree with you. And I'm thinking to myself, whoa, wait a minute. Did you mean to say that?
Yeah, I think the vast majority of Americans, including the 75 million, do not favor what he did on January 6th. Absolutely not.
Well, here's the thing. I kind of disagree with you. I think, okay, maybe here's the deal. Last night I watched Kennedy. And
let me phrase it. I'm running low on time, so let me phrase it this way. Knowing what you know now, would you have him do again what he did then?
What do you mean now?
If you knew what was going to follow after the speech he gave, would you ask him to give the same speech?
He probably, he did ask me.
No, would you suggest he give the same speech, John?
I'd say he maybe temper it just a little.
Thank you. Point. Game, set, match.
No, that's not true.
Yes, it is. He just said if he's got to change his speech, you were like the other 75 million who went, what are you doing?
But I don't think he incited the...
well, neither do I. I think there's a Brandenburg test. But if you would change what he did, you are conceding that what he did was wrong.
All right, I'm going to counterpoint to you. What about the hundreds of thousands? Because there was hundreds of thousands of people there, and 800 only did that.
No, there weren't hundreds of thousands. There were 15,000 people there. Only 800
there was
went.
More than that.
No, there were 15,000 people there. 800 invaded the Capitol. Of those 800, at least 400 are going to be guilty of a crime, I believe. And those are the facts. But of that, you're right. Most of the people who were there didn't rush the Capitol, which goes to the incite. I said that on NBC yesterday. If Trump was trying to incite the crowd, he did a very bad job of it.
But yeah, it's true. But the other people are getting indicted. I'm a Trump supporter, and even President Trump thought that was horrible. He said it the day after. Maybe he didn't say it quick enough, but he said every one of those people that are not.
John, you and I voted for President Trump. I was disappointed that he lost. What he did on January 6th was really bad, and people need to admit that and tell him to get on with his life. And if he would make an apology, things would be a lot better. Thank you, John. I got to tell people about ReliefFactor.com. ReliefFactor.com. I take every day. I remind you, put it in your car. Why? Because then you won't hit your forehead and say, "Doggone it." You'd see that if you were watching on my YouTube channel. But I always hit my forehead in the morning. I learned that from an orthopedic surgeon. He said, "You know why orthopedic surgeons have dents in the middle of their head?" He said, "Why?" I said, "Because they always go, like that." And that I didn't realize that orthopedic surgeons were the butt of many jokes. But you don't have to do that if you keep ReliefFactor.com in your car and you take it every day. Andy Castro, if you're listening, that's not about you, friend. I've told you that before. It's one of the standard jokes among surgeons. I personally love my orthopedic surgeon. Done me a world of good. I take Icarian, Curcumin, Resveratrol, and Omega, and I haven't had to go back to that surgeon since I started taking it because it supports the temporary relief of minor aches and pains. No more epidurals for me. Thank you, America. Come right back. Joined by Michael Oren from Israel.
Trending now on the Charlie Kirk Show.
Parler, which is still not active, thanks to a three-pronged attack from the corporatist elite, Amazon, Apple, and Google, they knocked Parler off the face of the earth. Parler is being blamed for not moderating their content ahead of the January 6th tragedy. I saw some of the posts that were put on Parler. Some of them were disgusting and gross. But Parler's a startup company. To put all the pressure on them to monitor everything that was put on their application is completely and totally unfair. But Democrats now want to know their private conversations. They are subpoenaing. Is that a word? Subpoenaing? Okay. Doesn't flow as nicely. They're issuing subpoenas to Parler, and they're putting a full court press on Parler. They are even alleging that possibly Parler was bribing Trump because they wanted to give him a part of the company while he was president, or after he was president, they were having the conversation. However, new information now shows that Facebook, not Parler, played the largest role in the Capitol Hill riot. New data from the American Department of Justice shows that despite the media and big tech campaign against Parler, it was Facebook which served as the top rallying point for those storming the Capitol building on January the 6th, Forbes reports. This is The Post-Millennial by Noah David Alter, Toronto.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
This is Albert Mohler for townhall.com. The American experiment is founded upon a presupposition, a prior commitment to an ordered liberty, an established order. That means policies. It means a covenant. In our case, it means a constitution. As of right now, the U.S. Constitution is the longest surviving written constitution in human history. It's a remarkable document. All of that came to the fore in violent events that interrupted the joint session of Congress to count the votes of the Electoral College. At the end of the day, our constitutional order proved itself once again resilient. But that doesn't take away any of the tragedy and the horror of what took place. It was an enormous stress test on ordered liberty, a stress test brought on by the President of the United States.
We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved.
It's an opportunity for the right, the left, conservatives, liberals, all Americans to repudiate political violence and reaffirm, once again, our commitment to ordered liberty. It's the American way. I'm Albert Mohler.
The Pepperdine School of Public Policy, America's unique graduate program for leaders. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. Trending now on The Dennis Prager Show.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. There's a great story in the Times of Israel this morning. Report: Iranian nuke scientist was killed by Israeli one-ton automated gun. The UK's Jewish Chronicle, citing unnamed intel sources, claim the man was hit by a Mossad team without U.S. involvement. Says killing likely sent back nuke weapons program by years. I'm joined from Israel by Michael Oren, who I am quite certain, his being the former ambassador of Israel to the United States, is not about to comment on this story or its veracity. But he will tell us that he's babysitting his grandkids again because he's been inoculated, right?
Yes, I am. I'll comment on the story, by the way. But yes, I am babysitting for my grandkids for the first time in months.
I'm deeply jealous. Deeply jealous.
Great. Well, you know, what can I say? You eat your heart out on that one because it's delightful to be back.
But you know something, Michael? Yesterday I read a story that in Israel the demand has fallen off dramatically. What gives? You got enough supplies, but people aren't getting it.
You mean the demand for the vaccination? Yeah.
Yeah.
People are anti-vaccination here as they are there, particularly among the ultra-Orthodox Jewish population. There's resistance to it. And we find ourselves having a surplus of vaccines in certain cases.
My gosh.
And all of a sudden you get a message saying there are 7,000 vaccines in a certain city. Get here if you want a vaccine. What we're going to have to start doing is vaccinating the kids because of the British mutation, which affects young people disproportionately. And so we've been vaccinating from 16 and up. We're going to have to go 16 and down if we're ever going to get to true, herd immunity here.
Very smart. And I believe I'm using the Israeli example as you are 2 or 3 months ahead of the United States. We're going to run into the same problem, and we've got to anticipate it. Now, tell me what you think about this story and what was intent. Obviously, it gets leaked from people inside the intelligence community somewhere, but why?
Well, it's a message that goes out. Nobody is, if you're going to threaten the Jewish people, the state of Israel, your life is going to be endangered. Your life is going to be questionable, and this state will go to there are no ends that this state will not go to. A lot of double negatives. No states this state will not go to defend our citizens.
What's it say about Iranian customs? I mean, it's not very good when you can smuggle in a 1-ton automatic weapon.
We smuggled out an entire archive from downtown Tehran.
How many people get executed every time they do this? I mean, the IRGC internal security, they must have an internal review like every year.
I mean, how did we smuggled out hundreds of thousands of documents from downtown Tehran? Amazing.
Well, Mossad is amazing.
Breaking into it would have been hard enough, but getting it out, that is amazing. And yet, that Iran is now, is hosting Al Qaeda, the organization responsible for killing 3,000 Americans. That Iran, that even the international inspectors have found evidence of nuclear weapons developments. Have you saw this?
Yes, I saw the story this morning that they are now making the metal necessary for nuclear weapons, and that they are not denying it.
And people still want to renew the JCPOA. Now, isn't that extraordinary?
Well, I don't think – I'm actually getting signals, and I'd like you to comment on this. I think that Team Biden is backtracking from that almost in real time because of the actions of the mullahs. Do you see the same thing I see, which is a lot of hedging on that?
I hope that's the case. I hope it's not just posturing, because what happened last week when the president was asked, whether he would lift sanctions in advance of Iran returning to the JCPOA levels, he said no. One-word answer, he said no, which is very good. But then the White House issued a clarification saying that he wouldn't relieve sanctions if the Iranians let me rephrase this, that the sanctions would not continue if Iran went back to 2015 levels, but they didn't have to stop all enrichment. So what does that mean? It means that you can have a type of a synchronization where America lifts a couple of sanctions and Iran goes a little bit back to 2015 until both sides reach where we started, which is JCPOA, which apparently is what the Democratic Party wants. It's what the President Biden's platform was when he's elected. But from the standpoint of the state of Israel, it's a grave danger, which is why our Chief of Staff, Aviv Kochavi, by the way, a Harvard graduate, Thank you. Said, that if you go back to JCPOA, Israel's going to have to prepare for war.
I'm not very sure about the Harvard stuff as the head of the IDF. Tell me what he took and when he took it, and I'll tell you whether that's a good idea.
He went to Harvard Kennedy School, but he's also a graduate of Johns Hopkins School of Advanced Studies in Washington.
Well, there you go. Now I'm a little bit more. Given some of the people who teach back at the old alma mater.
A student of Elliott Cohen.
All right, very good. Last question, though. If Iran is accelerating the production of the critical metals, they're not moving backwards, which means, according to the Biden signals, nor are we going back to the JCPOA. Last word to you, Michael Oren.
The last word is that they're upping the ante, and they only started doing this after the November elections. They didn't do this with the previous administration because they didn't dare do it. And so they're doing it because they can sense that if they up the ante, then at some point the United States might cave. I hope that's not the case.
I don't think it is. I actually am fairly encouraged by Secretary Blinken. Dr. Michael Oren, Dr. Michael Oren on Twitter. Thank you, Doctor. We will talk again next week from Israel. Don't go anywhere, America. I'll be joined by Matt Continetti next on The Hugh Hewitt Show.
Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
They are claiming that what happened was an insurrection. It's a gigantic lie. Okay? All right. First, I guess, unarmed insurrection where people take selfies at the desks of people they oppose politically. It's the selfie insurrection. All right? So that's the first lie. It's based on that. If it wasn't an insurrection, then there's nothing to really talk about. The second is that the president incited the insurrection, even though they can produce, the only thing they could produce is, he says, you got to fight for what you believe. As everybody knows, that incites riots. The Democrats never say fight for what we stand for. And it just continues along those lines. Third, they equate believing that the election was illegitimate with treason and being an insurrectionist and so on. I don't care what you believe. I don't care what my side believes or your side believes. I care the way people act. How many Democrats believe that the election was not stolen from Hillary Clinton? The whole point of the Russian collusion lie was to prove that it was an illegitimate election. Putin won. Remember? Putin, not Trump.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Larry Elder Show.
I watch CNN so you don't have to. And here's an exchange between Poppy Harlow, who's one of their hosts, and Douglas Brinkley, who is a left-wing historian. Listen to this when they explain why the trial is necessary, even though everybody knows what the outcome is going to be.
Explain what you mean when you say that, the importance of this, even if there is another acquittal, is creating a historical record for the future.
It's absolutely everything. I've been reminding people at the end of World War II in 1945, when Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, went to the death camps, the Holocaust camps of Europe, the dead. And
okay. He says, I've been reminding people that Dwight Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander at the end of the Second World War, went to the death camps. And now when you hear a historian start out by talking about Nazis and death camps, you know it's not going to end well.
Immediately, the first thing he did was write a letter to General George Marshall that said, don't document everything. We need film footage. We need photographs. I want everything covered because people will claim it's a hoax and a conspiracy.
You hear this? The reason we need to have the trial, says this historian, is because at the end of the Second World War, Dwight Eisenhower visited death camps and says, my goodness, we need to take pictures of this. We need to get footage because someday somebody's going to say, this never happened. And so what happened at the Capitol building on January 6th is similar to the Holocaust in the sense that some people later on are going to deny that it ever happened. Therefore, we have to have a trial. What?
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
But if you have Republicans who themselves are unwilling to push back, I mean, let's call them what they are. They're cowards.
And the magic word there is primary. Let Representative Glatsky know that if he doesn't stand up for internet freedom, that you will find a candidate to run against him who will. Inter-party competition. Now, some have spoken of the need for a new political party because they're so disgusted by the inside the Beltway country club Republican sellouts. That would be a tragic mistake. I just wrote a piece for The Spectator explaining why we don't need a new party. There are a number of legal barriers to a new party because the laws regarding ballot access were written by Republicans and Democrats working together. Your candidate will never get into the presidential debates as sponsored by the Commission on Presidential Debates, which is not a commission. It's not appointed by the president, and it's most certainly not about debate. If so, the Green Party and the Libertarian Party candidates should have been in the last debate. They were on the ballot in enough states to theoretically get 270 electoral votes. Yet another obstacle to a new party. The other problem you have is that the lamest Republican in America, the lamest Republican nominee begins with 35% of the vote. The lamest Democrat nominee in America begins with somewhere between 38 and 40% of the vote. And then you build from there. Running in a new party, you start at 0.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
This is Lanhee Chen of the Hoover Institution for townhall.com. The Biden administration announced in their first week that the U.S. is rejoining the World Health Organization. But the WHO is a flawed group, one that has performed poorly while the world has struggled with COVID-19. Early on, the group was far too deferential to China, even parroting Beijing's early claim that the virus could not be transmitted between humans. Since then, an independent panel concluded that the WHO dithered in its response, waiting too long to declare an international emergency. All the while, the WHO has continued to block Taiwan's participation because of political objections from the Chinese government, despite the fact that the world has much to learn from Taiwan's exceptional response to the virus. Before rejoining the WHO, we should have demanded some accountability and reform from the group for the $400 million in taxpayer dollars we send to it each year. It looks like we'll keep on writing blank checks to the WHO, which they are more than happy to keep cashing. I'm Lanhee Chen.
The Pepperdine School of Public Policy, America's unique graduate program for leaders. Learn more at publicpolicy.edu. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Burka.
If you're an attorney, is there a job more important than this one? I mean, is it more prestigious than to defend any president in a Senate impeachment trial? Bruce Castor, again, video cut 1, play cut.
House managers who spoke earlier were brilliant speakers. And I made some notes, and they'll hear about what I think about some of the things they said later when I'm closing the case. But I thought they were brilliant speakers, and I loved listening to them. And they're smart fellows.
Okay, I'm going to get preachy now. Don't ever, if you are in a setting, whether it's a high school debate club or the most important trial of the century, the second impeachment of a president who happens to have left office, don't sing the praises of the other team. How you love listening to them and how great they were. Unless, can you guess? Unless you're better than them. If you're going to crush them with your rhetoric, with your argument, with your evidence, with your style, with your tone, with your delivery, then you can do it. Then you can risk it. Even then, not advisable.
Keep up with what's trending.
Morning, Glory America. It's Hugh Hewitt. Thank you for listening this Thursday morning. I'm joined by Matt Continetti of the AEI, the American Enterprise Institute. Good morning, Matthew. How are you?
I'm well, Hugh. Thanks for having me.
You know, I pay you the ultimate compliment for a pundit. I think you have the ability to fairly summarize both sides of an argument, no matter which side you are on. And so I don't know which side you are on concerning the constitutionality of the proceedings in the Senate. How would you summarize the argument between people who think it is constitutional and those who do not?
Well, I'd summarize it this way. I think it's a good thing for constitutionalists that both sides of this argument are basing their reading on the text and also on the constitutional history. I think the people who say the trial is unconstitutional simply look at the words on the page, and they say that those words suggest that only a sitting president can be impeached. On the other side of the argument, there are people who point to history, who point to the fact that there have been impeachments of officials after they have left office. And they raise a couple of other points. They say that if you can't impeach or convict an official after he's left office, then really there's no accountability, because as soon as the official has done wrong, he could quit. And then the other argument they raise is that former President Trump was impeached while he was still in office. And it's just the trial that is happening after he left. And that is just because the Senate refused to come back into regular session after the events of January 6th. So that's how I would summarize both sides.
And Matthew, from a conservative's point of view, how do you rank the authority figures on both sides? Who do you think impresses the members of the Republican caucus for their arguments both for and against constitutionality?
Well, I think Hugh, just based on the vote that they conducted at the beginning of the trial, it's clear that most Republican senators believe that this trial is unconstitutional, which suggests that ultimately former President Trump will be acquitted. I do think that some of the legal authorities who have come out and said that the trial is constitutional are rather impressive. You're speaking about figures like Chuck Cooper, about Michael McConnell. These are serious originalists. And look, I think there are originalists on both sides of the question. People like John Yoo, for example, says that it is not constitutional. But on the one hand, I'm cheered that originalism is having this debate. On the other hand, I think we know on which side the senators have decided, even if there are plenty of authorities who disagree with the Republicans.
And you named the leading two pro-impeachment constitutionality authorities among the originalists, and you also noted one of the pro-two. But the ultimate for me is Judge Luttig, who himself was the runner-up for the Chief Justice of the United States election when George W. Bush nominated his friend and my friend, Chief Justice Roberts. They were 1 and 2 on the list. And so when I look to Judge Luttig in the Post, I am persuaded. Now let me ask you for your personal opinion. You did what I appreciate about you, Matt. You absolutely correctly summarized the argument on the conservative side. Which one do you find persuasive? I don't know.
I do believe the trial is constitutional, Hugh, and I believe that for both on my reading of the text of the Constitution, of the history surrounding post-impeachment trials, and also the fact that former President Trump was impeached when he was still president, and it was just kind of this procedural decision on the basis of the Senate that has led to his trial being conducted after he's left office.
So the one piece of evidence you didn't mention, which I think is most important to me, and I don't think it's constitutional, I never have, there are two actually. One is that in the aftermath of heinous crimes like Aaron Burr's murder of Alexander Hamilton and his treason trial, he was never impeached. Or when Richard Nixon resigned and reached 23% of popularity and he was pardoned by Gerald Ford so that he would not be criminally prosecuted, he was not impeached. That goes to sort of the state of the mind of the country prior. I am aware of the Blunt and the other one, the Secretary of War. But the other more important thing, Matt, and I just like your reaction to this, at the time of the framing, the very smart people that gathered in Philadelphia did so for 4 months in Pennsylvania, and the Pennsylvania state constitution explicitly provided for the impeachment of officials post-tenure, as did other constitutions at the time. These smart gentlemen, they were all men, of course, in that time, were very aware of every state constitution and drew liberally from all of their provisions. Why would they not have included an explicit post-tenure impeachment and trial authority had they intended to do so, given the precision with which the drafting committee worked?
I think that's a fair point, Hugh. And I also think that if someone were to try to impeach former President Trump now, after he's left office, for a different fact basis, I would agree with you that would be unconstitutional. He's no longer an official.
Oh, I see. So you're in a very rare camp. You're in the camp
he
that
was
says
impeached when he was president.
So the trial gets in under that
during his time in office, and that's why at the time I wrote that the trial should have been conducted immediately after the impeachment. But that was not the case for various reasons, and so we've arrived at this unusual place where we are.
Now, let's go for a moment and say that they had enough time to get to the impeachment. If Nancy Pelosi had sent it over on the next day, what would be the best argument in favor of conviction? I know what I think, but I'd like to hear what you think first.
I think the best argument for conviction is the totality of former President Trump's actions and rhetoric from the election night, basically, to the events of January 6th. Now, I think the impeachment managers made a mistake in their brief, Hugh, when they said that President Trump is singularly responsible for the events of January 6th. Obviously, that's not the case because the mob conducted the actual physical attack. However, if you look at what Trump did since the election was called for November 7th up until January 6th, he avoided multiple opportunities to take an off-ramp from his claims that the election had been stolen from him and that he had actually won the election in a landslide. And, up until the vote of the Electoral College in December of last year, that was a moment where he could have said, I fought the fight, I think there's fraud, but I'm standing down and my supporters should stand down.
That's persuasive, Matt, but last night, Ed Whalen, in a remarkably brilliant tweet that was so good because it was actually effective in 240 characters or less, noted that the president was completely derelict in his duty to stop an attack on the Constitution and the Republic during the hours after he spoke. That even if you would include up to and including arguing on the day, as Democrats have done in the past, against electors being ratified. They did so in 2004, they did so in 2016, they did so in 2000, that immediately upon the recognition of violence, he ought to have both dispatched any and all arms and taken to Twitter and taken to television to call it off. And that dereliction of duty argument was, to me, I thought Ed made a great point last night. What do you make about that?
I think that's also a great point. If you just continue the chronology up until after the riot was pacified or ended, it's absolutely the case. I think some of the evidence that was presented at the trial yesterday, with the timeline that the trial managers presented, with the video of Officer Goodman, in my view, saving Mitt Romney's life by telling him, buying Senator Romney the time to run in the other direction. The video of Vice President Pence and his family being evacuated. All of these images are disturbing, and they also raise the question of what former President Trump was doing at the time. And as Whalen points out,
we're low on time, so I want to make sure I get this question in. Chuck Todd and I discussed it yesterday on NBC, and you often are on Meet the Press, as I am with Chuck. And we have a fundamental disagreement that I don't think the media is doing the country a good service by failing to present the arguments against this trial in the way it's proceeding. The number one, which victims ought never to be jurors, and observers on the scene ought not to be analysts because they are emotionally involved in that. Do you think that's gone, commented on? I don't even know how a juror sits in this right now.
Yeah, and I think you can look at some of the Republicans and see how that even they are disturbed by what they're doing. Unfortunately, when the trial was taking place at the scene of the crime and the mob targeted the elected officials of the United States while they were performing their constitutional duty, there's no way, I think, of getting out of that situation, Hugh.
There is a motion of censure would have done so, or a decision to allow prosecution for incitement to the D.C. authorities, which would be constitutional. There were alternatives to what is, I think, a damaging process. Matt Continetti, always good to see you on Meet the Press. Always good to have you on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Thank you. I'll be right back, America. Stay tuned.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show brought to you by Sierra Pacific Mortgage. For more info, call 888-888-1172.
Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
What's with these Republicans? I would just give $1 and a donut to figure out what's in the mind of somebody like Senator Bill Cassidy. Here's cut 5. This is the same guy who was last week, just the other day, on with Meet the Press and Chuck Todd.
The president wasn't there. He wasn't allowed counsel. They didn't amass evidence. In 5 hours, they kind of judged, and boom, he's impeached. Now, I'm told that under the Watergate, under the Clinton impeachments, there were truckloads of information. Here, it was a video. There was no process. I mean, it's almost like, if it happened in the Soviet Union, you would have called it a show trial.
That's the guy. That was last week. That's the guy who yesterday voted with the Democrats to proceed with the trial because he didn't like Bruce Castor. And listen, Bruce Castor did a terrible job. President Trump was said to be very angry behind the scenes. Fox News quotes sources as saying Trump was furious and beyond angry over his defense team's showing on day 1 of his second impeachment trial, despite his ultimate acquittal almost certain. The sources who spent time with President Trump said he was particularly incensed with the effort thus far by his attorney, Bruce Castor. Do you get the feeling that the reason he hasn't had a strong showing by his lawyers is because no attorney wants to touch this thing?
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
We already know that tech companies were interfering in the 2020 election significantly. Little did we know there was both private and public pressure to have the tech companies act as political referees to the benefit of Joe Biden and the Democrats. The most interfered with election in American history. Let me say that again. It was the most interfered with election in American history. From the private interests to the tech interests to the changing of how we do voting in this country, it was as if it was the first election in American history, because every election before it was done in completely different ways. But these tech companies have incredible influence over Congress. They give millions of dollars through lobbying and direct contributions to be able to dictate the legislative agenda and the regulatory agenda. Remember, President Donald Trump, as one of the last things he did as president, tried to get Section 230 removed as part of the National Defense Bill. Congress wanted nothing to do with it. Would have been a great time to hold these tech companies accountable. In a bizarre and stunning turn of events, if Congress would have repealed Section 230, Facebook could have been sued for not monitoring the violence that these rioters were planning on Facebook. Same with Parler. They're both protected by Section 230. So Congress is now using this as an opportunity to do the tech companies' bidding to suffocate Parler.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
This is Albert Mohler for Townhall.com. The American experiment is founded upon a presupposition, a prior commitment to an ordered liberty, an established order. That means policies. It means a covenant. In our case, it means a constitution. As of right now, the U.S. Constitution is the longest surviving written constitution in human history. It's a remarkable document. All of that came to the fore in violent events that interrupted the joint session of Congress to count the votes of the Electoral College. At the end of the day, our constitutional order proved itself once again resilient. But that doesn't take away any of the tragedy and the horror of what took place. It was an enormous stress test on ordered liberty, a stress test brought on by
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. One of my favorite bumps. Whenever the Constitutional Convention comes up, we play that. I hope you listen to the bass very closely. Mark is not a big fan, but sometimes you just have to take who's around. Glad to be back. Time for a market update brought to you by AndrewandTodd.com. During the break, Dwayne was explaining to me why he won't be in the show much for the next few weeks. They're adding on to his house, and he's overseeing it from the backyard in a lawn chair with lemonade, and that takes up a lot of time. He refinanced, he and the wonderful Mrs. Dwayne refinanced with AndrewandTodd.com. Andrew and Todd, of course, to all of the friends and family and me and everybody. But if you have great credit and if you've got money in your house and you want to take the money out and put it back into the house, then it gets a little bit easier. And you want to tell us what your rate is? You want to be a rate bragger?
Low threes.
Yeah, see, low threes. And that was a refi, taking money out, which is a little bit more expensive than buying a house or simply refinancing and not getting cash out. So don't miss AndrewandTodd.com. Call them at 888-888-1172. The Dow was up 61 yesterday. The NASDAQ was down 35, and the S&P was off a point. Everything overseas, everything is green this morning. Japan, Hong Kong, England, Germany. The interest rate went down a little bit yesterday on the 10-year Treasury to 1.13. That means interest rates remain low. If you're just doing a straight refi, you might get into the twos. If you're doing a refi with cash out, you'll be in the low threes. It depends on a bunch of factors. But you can't get that answer until you call them at 888-888-1172. Rick Scott is coming up after the break. So I wanted to play for you the very measured comments of Anderson Cooper last night about the impeachment trial, cut number 6.
And we've seen it in Bosnia, we've seen it in Rwanda, where radio was telling people Hutus were telling the radio listeners that Tutsi were cockroaches.
So we're not going to hear Anderson Cooper. It's not playing. That's too bad. Anderson, according to my notes, compared the Capitol riots to Bosnia and Rwanda. And while a loss of life of one person was indeed the result, that would not be historically accurate, not even close. And so I hope that my notes are wrong. I also want you to hear Jen Psaki yesterday, again, talking about the return to classes of under the Biden program, cut number 4.
Well, certainly we are not planning
and that's
to
not working either.
Celebrate at 100
Okay, they
days
broke the
if we
machine.
reach that goal.
Andrew and Todd broke the machine. I don't know who broke the machine, but you give me this. Dwayne, can you come up? Can we put up the Dwayne cam? I have a request. Yeah, we have to put up the white screen.
Well, Dwayne was trying to figure out what Ben did to the computer.
I want to point to this. This is if people are watching on the Hugh cam on my YouTube channel. This is a list of cuts that say there are 8 cuts, and actually there aren't any cuts. There are 0 cuts.
And the reason there are no cuts right now is because I can't diagnose why
but I'm just saying
the computer.
That when I work all night to find these cuts and I tell them what to get, and then when they send me a list that there are 8 cuts, and then this is actually the list of cuts, there aren't any cuts.
We actually did play some cuts today because we played your wonderfully audioed
that was the
NBC
one
appearance.
I personally put onto my computer last night.
Of course
it did. Okay, now America, stand by. Senator Rick Scott will be joining us, and he is a juror, and so I thought we'd talk to a juror rather than a journalist. Stay tuned, America. We do it differently here. We don't repeat our opinions. We make the news. Stay tuned to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
People who claim they are patriots are in the face of a police officer calling him, as we're seeing it right there, and gouging out the eye of one, squeezing one in, suffocating one in a doorway.
Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
I want to talk to you about where we are in the culture and in the nation right now. So talk to us. What are you thinking?
As you know, I reaffirmed my faith in Jesus Christ when I was going through this crucible of being tortured in a politically motivated prosecution by Robert Mueller. Now, I know you missed this, Eric, along with everybody else in the country, but at midnight on Election Day, the busiest news day of the year, the Department of Justice released the last unredacted sections of the Mueller report regarding Roger J. Stone Jr. And you know what they said? They never had any factual evidence whatsoever against me regarding the Russians, Julian Assange, WikiLeaks, stolen emails, John Podesta, nothing. They had nothing. Now, who releases something at midnight? So in other words, the big media outlets, CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the people who posted headlines blaring that I was a Russian agent, none of them cover this moment. It gets covered by The Guardian and it gets covered by BuzzFeed only because BuzzFeed brought the lawsuit which required the Justice Department to finally unredact this information. To take it to modern day terms, yes, I was in Washington. I spoke on January 5th. I actually never left my hotel room at all on January 6th. I wasn't on the ellipse. I didn't march to the Capitol. I wasn't at the Capitol. I was as horrified as every American to see acts of violence there.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
Nobody should be coming to the Capitol. Nobody should be doing anything that hurts another human being or tears up property. It shouldn't happen. So my hope is that everybody will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. But here's why I look at this. The Democrats are just obsessed with Trump. I mean, Trump is not in office. I mean, he is not the president. And so why don't the Democrats stop their obsession and focus on getting something done instead of making us sit through this unconstitutional, backward-looking, waste of time impeachment? I mean, the Democrats don't care about getting anything done for a family. This is just pure political theater. It ought to be done at the Kennedy Center. It shouldn't be done at the Capitol. So I hope, I'll be glad when this ends. I hope everybody in this country is thinking, why are the Democrats focused on the past rather than the future? This is horrible. This is horrible precedent. So if you don't like the next president, so you're going to find something to impeach him on. And then whoever's in the Senate then has to sit through an impeachment. Where, think about it, there was no due process. I mean, they didn't do any interviews. They didn't do any depositions. They did nothing. They just said, "Oh, we got to impeach this guy," and then they sat on it. They had to rush through it, and then it sat on it. So there's nothing for an American family, and I'm disappointed in what the Democrats have done.
So the point, though, being 44 of the members of the Republican caucus voted against proceeding, either because it's unconstitutional or they had, in the case of Ted Cruz, an argument that it's too partisan. Have any of those 44, to your knowledge, changed their mind, or is the acquittal of President Trump still a guaranteed thing in your mind?
Nobody's told me that they've changed their mind. I mean, look, I think we all hated the fact, just disgusted. It's just disgusting that people would come into the Capitol and some of the things these people said. It's just absolutely disgusting. I'm disappointed that President Trump didn't say something quicker to make sure people left the Capitol. With that, I'm very disappointed that he didn't do that. But this is just a charade because the Democrats are obsessed with a prior president. This is horrible. This is horrible precedent. And by the way, if it's constitutional, where's the Chief Justice?
Well, I have pointed out
running the thing.
Article 2, Section 4 persuaded me even before Judge Luttig opined on this, and he's the authority to whom I look. I know there are counter authorities and people like Mike McConnell, a former judge, and Chuck Cooper, a former United States Assistant Attorney General and a big man in the conservative movement. However, Article 2, Section 4 is pretty clear to me, and I don't have to invent phrases that aren't there in order to justify this. But, Senator, I also wonder about the message that's going out in no other setting, not a criminal trial or a civil trial, not in any proceeding in a college or a fraternity or a club or anywhere, are victims allowed to be jurors. And this is unique because you are solely charged with impeachment. I don't know if it were an impeachable offense and it was constitutionally being conducted in the appropriate time, it would be difficult. But what do you think about being a juror as you see the video of, I don't know if you were in the Senate that day, but, you know, Mitt Romney's been a friend of mine since 2005. It's very upsetting to see this stuff happen. I've known Mike Pence longer than that. I just don't know how anyone can actually fairly judge this.
Well, I was there, and we were, we evacuated. I was never fearful for my life. But I mean, I'm sure maybe some people were. I don't know, but it's wrong what they did. It's wrong. It's disgusting. It's undemocratic. All the bad things. This is not what should be happening in our country. So I want to thank our law enforcement. I want to thank the Capitol Police. I mean, they did. If you look at what they did, I mean, they clearly did everything they could to try to make sure this didn't happen, that people didn't get hurt. The lives are lost are horrible. There's nothing you can say good about this, but it's unconstitutional. The president should have said something faster. But this is just political theater because they're obsessed with a prior president. Let's remember that. And Nancy Pelosi sat on this. If she actually wanted a trial, she could have. They could have done this. I think the way they did it without any testimony, without anything, was wrong. But she sat on it even after that. Didn't give it to us.
So to just summarize and move on, Senator. You still think it's unconstitutional. Yesterday's testimony did not change your point of view, and you know of no other Republican who has changed their point of view.
Not that they've said it to me, Hugh.
And so your estimate is still, as Lindsey Graham said this morning, you would agree the president will be acquitted at the end of this.
Absolutely. If it's unconstitutional, how can you convict somebody in something that's unconstitutional?
Well, that's what I tried to argue on NBC last night with Chuck Todd, is that not one member of the 44 who voted not to proceed on Tuesday are going to vote to proceed and to convict on the basis of video that they already know exists. Otherwise, that would be demonstrating a lack of grasp on the Constitution, given the argument that they made on Tuesday. It's just astonishing to me, the coverage of this. But let's go to now post-acquittal. The Senate has to come back to... I have one more question on process. Last night, Senator Lee objected to the manager's presentation, arguing that he was being mischaracterized and that they had alleged he had said something he did not say. He was quite adamant about this. He's a very good lawyer, that they were using untruthful testimony. He objected. Senator Leahy, who was in the chair, not the Chief Justice, and Senator Leahy is, by everyone's admission, one of the most partisan Democrats on the Hill. Senator Leahy overruled him and would not allow that objection. What does that tell you about the fairness of this proceeding?
Yeah, how can somebody that's a partisan be a judge? I mean, how can they be presiding over the Senate? Where is the Chief Justice? Where is the Chief Justice? Read the Constitution. That's what it says. If we're going to have an impeachment, it's going to be with the Chief Justice. He didn't show up. And we're talking about a former president, a civilian right now. We are impeaching. We're doing an impeachment trial over a civilian.
And the jury is made up of victims, and the judge is Patrick Leahy himself a victim. I mean, I've never seen anything like this, and the prudential thing, as well as the constitutional thing, would have been said.
It's a horrible precedent.
Move on.
Think of the precedent of this. Do you think there's not going to be pressure now for Republicans to do this when we get control of the House in 2 years?
Well, you know, there's going to be pressure for Kevin McCarthy to bring impeachment proceeding against Nancy Pelosi for abuse of her speaker's gavel. And I don't think that would be wise. I will oppose it at the time. But there will be Republicans who want her impeached and she's going to retire as a former speaker because of her abuse of the impeachment pile. I mean, it never stops. It never stops.
And this is nothing to help an American citizen. Nobody wins. Nobody gets help. Nobody gets a job. Nobody gets a vaccine. Nobody gets a school open. Nobody gets anything out of this. This is just political theater.
All right. Now, Senator, if I can move to the $1.9 trillion budget reconciliation, we know that they are going to pass a lot of money. Joe Biden wants to pass double what President Obama passed. I think it comes down to the math being that. Of that 1.9, is any of it going to go to national defense? Because the Congress will have appropriated $5 trillion in the course of 1 year. I don't think they're going to spend a penny for defense, reversing the old adage, millions for defense, not a penny for tribute. It's going to be millions for pork, not a penny for defense.
Yeah, look, the Democrats don't care about the defending this country. They don't. It's a fight to get money in the budget for defense. And look at this: we've spent already on COVID. We've spent over 4.5 or allocated over $4.5 trillion. We actually don't even know how much we haven't spent. We have no earthly idea. Will all Republicans want to help people who have lost their job? You better believe it. Help our businesses get open. Republicans will do that. But this idea of bailing out New York and California revenues are up billions of dollars, and they want to give them, it's just a payback. It's a payback to Cuomo. It's a payback to Pritzker in Illinois. It's a payback to Newsom out in California for their support of Biden. That's all this is. $350 billion when these states have not seen a downturn in their revenue.
So Senator
we've
Scott,
already given them $400 billion. This is ridiculous.
Given that they're going to do it, the one thing I would support first, of course, is additional PPP for businesses that have been shuttered. And then I would support the child tax credit. Is there, of all the $1.9 trillion, which is so much money, I can't put my arms around it, what is the least bad expenditure of that $1.9 trillion in your view?
Well, we have to continue to say, do we need more money to get the vaccine out? Do we need more money to help our small businesses get, stay open or get open? Do we need more money for our schools? Now, I think all those things we've got to look at. We've got to look at people if they've lost their jobs. That's what we've got to focus on. But this idea of bailing out states, that are seeing that. And first off, how did the federal government become responsible when we've already given them $400 billion in the last year, and they won't even tell us how they spent that money, even though it was all supposed to be spent on COVID. No, the states don't even tell us anything.
All right, a last question, Senator, because
crazy.
I always want to check in on the recruitment effort. You've got to find candidates in Ohio. I believe Josh Mandel, the former state treasurer, is going to run for Rob Portman's seat. I don't know what's going on in Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Nevada, Arizona, and Georgia. How are you doing on recruitment?
We're talking to a lot of people. There's a lot of interest. People know it's going to be 22 is going to be a great year to win seats. I think the ones we clearly have a really good shot at winning is Arizona, Georgia, New Hampshire, Nevada. But the truth is, I think it's going to be a great year all across the country because people are going to be fed up with this agenda of open borders, amnesty, killing jobs. This Keystone Pipeline just killed the jobs and they don't care. Raise the minimum wage, which we know millions of people lose their jobs. The Democrats, we don't care. The debt, we have $27 trillion worth of debt. The Democrats, they don't care. Buttigieg, who's the transportation secretary, wants to raise your gas tax. That's a tax on the poorest Americans the most. So the Americans are going to be fed up with the Democrat socialism, big government, higher taxes agenda, and we're going to have a big year in 22.
Keep posting this up, Senator Rick Scott from Florida. Thank you, Senator. Don't go anywhere, America. I'm going to talk with Jim Talent after this, except to ReliefFactor.com, of course. Great sponsor of the program, $19.95. Get you started. Support for the temporary relief of minor aches and pains. Lots of you are exercising more as the shutdowns and lockdowns and stay-at-homes continue. You're doing a lot of workout in your own gym. You're out there rocking and running. If you've developed some new aches and pains you didn't have before, good on you. That comes with exercise and it comes with aging. ReliefFactor.com will help you. $19.95, ReliefFactor.com. Join the tens of thousands of people who take it every morning, including me, and come right back for Jim Talent. Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt, joined by Jim Talent, formerly senator from Missouri, great observer of everything in the Senate, always. Good morning, Senator Talent. How are you?
Well, I'm fine, you. I'm going to put that on my LinkedIn, that I'm an observer.
Observer of all things. That's a great thing. Well, you observed yesterday's proceedings. They were harrowing to watch, but as Rick Scott just told me, they did not change his mind that it is an unconstitutional proceeding. Have you heard from any of your former colleagues and friends, and you have many in the body, that they have changed their mind on whether or not this ought to be unfolding?
No, I haven't. I don't expect them to. I agree with you. It's probably unconstitutional, although I don't think we'll ever get an authoritative, ruling on that. I think it's very irresponsible. And look, if they think that Trump is responsible for the riot, investigate him and indict him.
Yeah, because people seem to think that you can't do that, but in fact, former presidents can be prosecuted for what they did in office. They just can't be prosecuted while they're in office.
Well, exactly right, and that's one of the that's the big reason, the big practical reason for impeachment, and particularly for a president, is to remove them from office so they can be prosecuted. Okay, he's not in office. I mean, if you think he incited the riot, or charge him with conspiracy, right? I mean, I just do an investigation, charge him. The problem is they can't prove it because he's not responsible for that. As you said, and others, as Cornyn said on the Senate floor, it was reckless what he did because he whipped up a crowd on behalf of a baseless cause. Is what he did.
Ed Whalen made a good point yesterday, which I hadn't actually thought. There's a charge of dereliction of duty. Once the riot began, he did not act expeditiously to defend the government. It would be like any other attack on the government not responding. President froze. And that might be an impeachable offense had it been conducted while he was president. But it isn't now because he's not. Let me ask you, Senator Talent, in terms of the general message. In no other proceeding of any sort, any quasi-judicial proceeding, certainly no criminal or civil trial, but let's say a disciplinary hearing in a high school or a fraternity hearing or a college proceeding against a professor, victims are never allowed to be jurors. And certainly victims are never allowed to be judges. And last night, Senator Lanhee overruled an objection by Mike Lee that his words were being misrepresented. This is a horrible education in civics for America.
Yeah, I agree with you. And particularly when there are so many other big issues that are pending, which a number of senators talked about, including what we're going to do with this coronavirus package, and I'm going to segue into my favorite topic, Hugh, what we're going to do with the defense budget. Now, what we're going to see in the next couple of months, Hugh, is them spending another several $1 trillion. I think the total is going to be like $5 trillion, and then come back and say they have to freeze the defense budget because we're in an era of fiscal constraint.
Yes.
And, it shows a complete breakdown of coherence in government. But that is going to be the argument, I fear. And if Lloyd Austin needs to go over and see the president and see the chief of staff and say, my department needs to prepare for what's coming in the Western Pacific, and I need money. And
I asked Mike Gallagher yesterday if he could not go to Angus King, who is a serious man on armed services. And everyone's got a veto on this because they only have 50 votes, and demand some of the 1.9 go to defense, whether it is shipbuilding, whether it is cybersecurity, whether it is top line for 4 or 5 years. Is there any chance of that happening in your view? They all have a veto. If there's no defense spending, it's because every Democrat says, or independents caucusing with Democrats say they don't want it.
Yeah, I think they'd have a lot of clout. I think now is the time to do that. But I also think that the Office of Secretary of Defense, and it's hard. Look, I get it. But the way the system works, if OSD, the Office of Secretary of Defense, is not in there fighting for the equities of his or her department, they're just not taken into account in the system. So we need the secretary and the chiefs first within the administration to go in and say, we're spending all this money, okay? You're worried about the economy. Let's put some of it into defense so we can defend the country and we can create jobs that way. If they took a tenth of what they've spent on, these various bills and spread it out over the defense budget over the next 5 years, we would have what we needed to prepare and to deter the Chinese. That's what it would take.
And $5.5 trillion, $6.5 trillion spent within a year and not a dime for defense.
They're not going to spend
Senator.
it within a year. They can't spend it.
They
within
appropriate it. I mean, they appropriate, and not
Yeah.
a dime appropriated for defense. I'm astonished by that, Jim Talent.
It's incredibly irresponsible. It's what happens when you get distracted by it. That's why I said this is irresponsible. They're not focusing on the issues that matter. And I'm deeply concerned with what's going to happen in the South China Sea. And it's America's armed forces that deter violence and give the economic and diplomatic tools time to work. So that deter aggression, I should say.
Very quickly, Senator, the Houthis have used the first signal of weakness from Team Biden to launch attacks on Saudi Arabia bases and their civilian airports. Any chance of Team Biden reconsidering what they've done?
Yeah, I think so. I'm giving them a little time. I mean, they do need some time to review this, but they need to support the coalition that was rebuilt with the Abraham Accords.
Jim Talent on Twitter, at Jim Talent. Follow me to hour 3 of this Thursday edition of the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Birch Gold Group.
This is Lanhee Chen of the Hoover Institution for townhall.com. The Biden administration announced in their first week that the U.S. is rejoining the World Health Organization. But the WHO is a flawed group, one that has performed poorly while the world has struggled with COVID-19. Early on, the group was far too deferential to China, even parroting Beijing's early claim that the virus could not be transmitted between humans. Since then, an independent panel concluded that the WHO dithered in its response, waiting too long to declare an international emergency. All the while, the WHO has continued to block Taiwan's participation because of political objections from the Chinese government, despite the fact that the world has much to learn from Taiwan's exceptional response to the virus. Before rejoining the WHO, we should have demanded some accountability and reform from the group for the $400 million in taxpayer dollars we send to it each year. It looks like we'll keep on writing blank checks to the WHO, which they are more than happy to keep cashing. I'm Lanhee Chen.
The Pepperdine School of Public Policy, America's unique graduate program for leaders. Learn more at publicpolicy.edu.
Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
The reason that I am having trouble with the argument is the American people just spoke, and they just changed administrations. So in the light most favorable to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle here, their system works. The people are smart enough, in the light most favorable to them, they're smart enough to pick a new administration if they don't like the old one. And they just did. And he's down there, Pennsylvania Avenue now.
If you were wondering, that's not the White House legal counsel. Just in case you were wondering, that person, whether you say, oh, the American people are so wise they chose Joe Biden. Allegedly, that's Bruce Castor, who, according to reports, works for the 45th President of the United States. Why he spent time on that argument yesterday? Your job is not to praise the last election, it's to deal with the charge of incitement to insurrection. Now, I looked at this guy's bio. He has he was a prosecutor in Pennsylvania, put some very bad people away, including murderers. But what happened to him? Again, from yesterday, this is Bruce Castor talking about one of our founding fathers. Video cut 2. Play cut.
Paraphrasing the famous quote from Benjamin Franklin, who, as a Philadelphian, I feel as though I can do that because he's my founding father too.
He's my founding.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
The impeachment trial will proceed. Dun, dun, dun. Big vote yesterday. That's one headline in USA Today. Huge font. Trial to proceed. Chilling video. Managers open by reviving riot. And then the vote was taken, 56-44. 6 Republicans joined with the Democrats in claiming that this show trial, this snap impeachment, is constitutional. Bill Cassidy, for some reason, out of the clear blue, last week he's on TV saying, oh, it's a show trial, doesn't mean anything, it's unconstitutional. But because he didn't like the performance of the president's lawyers yesterday, somehow he decided to vote suddenly that it was constitutional. But then again, that brings you to 6 Republicans, which means you're far short from the 17 Republican threshold to get a conviction. They've given away the ending. The vote yesterday sort of confirms that Trump will be acquitted, which will lead to the former president correctly claiming he's been vindicated. Certainly vindicated from an impeachment claim that he incited an insurrection. I don't know how many times, how many places you can play this.
I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard.
So the Democrats claim that Trump saying, go peacefully, let your voice be heard, or make your voice heard peacefully, incites a riot and an insurrection. Great. Good luck with that.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
Parler, which is still not active, thanks to a 3-pronged attack from the corporatist elite, Amazon, Apple, and Google, they knocked Parler off the face of the earth. Parler is being blamed for not moderating their content ahead of the January 6th tragedy. I saw some of the posts that were put on Parler. Some of them were disgusting and gross. But Parler's a startup company. To put all the pressure on them to monitor everything that was put on their application is completely and totally unfair. But Democrats now want to know their private conversations. They are subpoenaing. Is that a word? Subpoenaing? Okay. Doesn't flow as nicely. They're issuing subpoenas to Parler, and they're putting a full court press on Parler. They are even alleging that possibly Parler was bribing Trump because they wanted to give him a part of the company while he was president, or after he was president, they were having the conversation. However, new information now shows that Facebook, not Parler, played the largest role in the Capitol Hill riot. New data from the American Department of Justice shows that despite the media and big tech campaign against Parler, it was Facebook which served as the top rallying point for those storming the Capitol building on January the 6th, Forbes reports. This is The Post-Millennial by Noah David Alter, Toronto.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
This is Albert Mohler for Townhall.com. The American experiment is founded upon a presupposition, a prior commitment to an ordered liberty, an established order. That means policies. It means a covenant. In our case, it means a constitution. As of right now, the U.S. Constitution is the longest surviving written constitution in human history. It's a remarkable document. All of that came to the fore in violent events that interrupted the joint session of Congress to count the votes of the Electoral College. At the end of the day, our constitutional order proved itself once again resilient. But that doesn't take away any of the tragedy and the horror of what took place. It was an enormous stress test on ordered liberty, a stress test brought on by the President of the United States.
We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved.
It's an opportunity for the right, the left, conservatives, liberals, all Americans to repudiate political violence and reaffirm, once again, our commitment to ordered liberty. It's the American way. I'm Albert Mohler.
The Pepperdine School of Public Policy, America's unique graduate program for leaders. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu.
Trending now on The Dennis Prager Show.
Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. It's Hugh Hewitt on this Thursday morning. So glad you can be with me. I have been interviewing incoming freshmen to the House of Representatives among the Republican caucus. There are so many extraordinary stories, and none is the equal of Stephanie Bice. She is the new Congresswoman from the 5th District of Oklahoma, and she joins us now. Welcome, Congressman Bice. It's great to have you with us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me, Hugh.
I'd like to note for everyone at the beginning, you are the first, and this surprised me, Iranian-American elected to the Congress. What does it feel to be the first Congresswoman and the first Iranian-American elected from your ethnic group?
You know, actually, I wasn't aware of that when I was elected either, but my father is an immigrant. He came here in 1970. My parents met young and got married. And, you know, I was raised, you know, really not super familiar with Iran other than the things that my dad would share with me. But over the years, I've learned a lot about the history, the culture, the conflict, of course. And I hope that, you know, someday there's an opportunity to bridge the relationship. But unfortunately, right now, and it has been for many decades, the Iranian regime is one that is challenging and challenging for its own people. But I think one of the great things is I can really educate folks on the difference between the government and the people. And that's one of the things I hope to do over my time serving.
Now, Congresswoman Bice, which committees have you landed on?
Well, I am super excited. I was named to the House Armed Services Committee, which is an important part of.
Yep.
Thank you. It's a really important part of the district. We have right outside of the district is Tinker Air Force Base, which employs about 25,000 civilians and 3,000 military, many of which live in the 5th Congressional District. So I'm very excited to be on Armed Services. And I also am a member of the Space Science and Technology Committee, and as a matter of fact, will be part of the subcommittee for environment on that as well.
Well, congratulations on Armed Services. That's, I always think, the premier. Now, my friend Mike Gallagher is on there, and you have to be careful about him because Gallagher's a Packers fan. He gets a little bit crazy at certain times of the year, but be very, very careful about him. We also hope that you will be pro-Navy. Even though you've got an Air Force base there, I hope you're going to be pro-Navy. This is a navalist show.
It's interesting that you bring that up. There's actually a naval installation on Tinker Air Force Base.
What? In Oklahoma?
In Oklahoma, that's exactly right. I was a honorary commander at Tinker Air Force Base about 4 years ago when I was in the state Senate, and I learned that there is a small Navy installation, flies an important plane out of Tinker Air Force Base, and so yes, I will be paying attention to the Navy as well.
Well, good. I recommend to you the brand new book by Jerry Hendricks to provide and to maintain and provide a Navy, to build and provide, to provide and maintain a Navy. That's the color. He's quoting the Constitution. To provide and maintain a Navy. I want everyone to buy that. Tell me, Congresswoman Bice, what's it like the first week, the first 2 weeks? You've got this crazy proceeding going on in the Senate. Yeah. It's been a very tumultuous post-election period. How are you settling in?
Well, I think it was, you know, shocking and really disappointing in a lot of ways. Never in my wildest dreams did I believe that we would have a riot and then an impeachment vote in my first 2 weeks as a new member of Congress. And it's funny because many of the senior members have seen freshmen walking by in the halls and said, man, I feel sorry for you guys. It's a rocky start, certainly. A lot of division, a lot of frustration, a lot of anger. My hope is that we'll get past that. You know, it's interesting. Biden talked a lot about unity in his inauguration speech, but we've seen exactly the opposite over the last few weeks with the executive orders that he's been pushing forward and really, you know, a lack of engagement so far. And, you know, I hope that we can get past that. The American people are tired. They are tired of the rhetoric. They're tired of the fighting. They want Congress to get to work for them, and that's what I think most of us want.
Now, would you give the audience some background on how you came to run for Congress? I know you served in the Oklahoma State Senate, but give us the sort of thumbnail that people in your constituency in Oklahoma 5th will know.
Sure. I was actually in the private sector for almost 20 years. I did sales and marketing, worked for a tech company, did digital marketing, and had my own firm. and was approached about running for the state Senate back in 2013. I had never run for public office before, had no idea how to run, but I thought it was important. There were not enough women serving in Oklahoma in the legislature at the time. Out of 149 members, 19 were women. So as the mother of daughters, I thought it was a great opportunity for me to show my daughters not to be afraid to do something sort of big and bold and outside the box. So ran for the state Senate seat in 2014, won my runoff election that August, and served in that capacity for 6 years. In 2018, I was up for my first reelection and won my reelect by the largest number of votes of any state legislator in Oklahoma. And that was the same night Republicans lost the congressional seat that we had held for over 40 years to Congresswoman Horn. And I happened to be at the GOP watch party celebrating the new governor, and people started walking up to me saying, "Are you ready to run for Congress?" And I thought it was, very humbling, but I hadn't really thought about it. And several months later, I announced my intent to run for the Republican nomination, and here we are.
So tell me, Congresswoman Bice, when you've got redistricting ahead of you, is Oklahoma losing a district, gaining a district, or staying the same?
We are staying the same. Oklahoma City, which is the metro area that I represent, has had tremendous growth over the last 10 years. We've seen a real explosion of folks moving in, and so there will be some changes. We're just not really sure what those numbers will look like, and I'm a little disappointed that we're not finding out those numbers for another several months. I was hopeful that we would see that in the next few weeks, but my understanding now is it's going to be July, which is 6 months past when we thought we would see numbers, and that's pretty frustrating.
Oh, and that puts a jam down on every redistricting effort. In Oklahoma, I believe it is done by the legislature without the input of the governor. Correct me if I'm wrong. So they have to get a committee.
That is correct.
Yeah, so they have to get a committee together, and they have to divvy up all of those state representative seats. And then how many members of Congress does Oklahoma have?
We have 5, and here's an interesting side note. It has to be passed by the legislature, and we are not in session after the last Friday in May. So this requires now that the governor will have to call a special session sometime later in the summer or fall to be able to pass the redistricting lines.
That is pretty remarkable. Now, go back to the campaign. Oklahoma, of course, big oil and gas state. Very first thing President Biden does is veto the Keystone Pipeline. What do you think is ahead for your industry that is so basic to the economy of the Show Me State?
I'm really...
I'm sorry. Oh, my gosh, not the Show Me State. Whoa, the Sooner State. Oh, my gosh.
I won't. My friends up north will be okay.
Yeah.
It's really troubling. I was part of a press conference last week in a roundtable with Leader McCarthy talking about the impact of the executive orders. And people have said, wait a minute, the Keystone doesn't run through Oklahoma, which is true, but there are a lot of ancillary impact from the Keystone Pipeline, particularly for companies that do work on the line, whether it's pipeline safety or other types of services. So you do have an impact there. But my bigger concern is that we are taking a step back. We are beginning to look at really limiting our ability to explore. He not only did he put a pause on the Keystone, but he also put a moratorium on federal ban on federal land drilling. And these are going to be real issues moving forward because of production. And my additional concern here is we haven't even seen what he plans to do with EPA regulations. So it's an interesting dynamic because President Biden is saying that he wants to help low-income families, but what's happening is he's going to drive up the cost of oil and gas, which means you're going to have higher gas prices, higher heating oil prices, and it's going to have the exact opposite effect of what he says he wants to do. It makes no sense. It hurts states' economy. Oklahoma as well as New Mexico and others, and Texas, North Dakota. It doesn't make any sense, and it's under the guise of we want cleaner energy. Look, oil and gas companies are very familiar with how to be mindful of environment. I mean, they have to deal with things like making sure that they don't impact the breeding ground of the lesser prairie chicken, which we had a fight in Oklahoma about several years ago.
Well, for 30 years, I practiced endangered species law, so I know that business. I'm retired now. But light crude is up to $58 a barrel. You're absolutely right, Congresswoman Bice. Please keep coming back. Congratulations on walking into Congress, even in a turbulent time. Thank you for serving the country. Look forward to talking to you again. Congresswoman Bice's Twitter account is Rep Bice. That's easy, REPBICE. Thank you. I'll be right back, America, on The Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show brought to you by Sierra Pacific Mortgage. For more info, call 888-888-1172.
Show. Trending now on the Larry Elder Show.
Review. I watch CNN so you don't have to. And here's an exchange between Poppy Harlow, who's one of their hosts, and Douglas Brinkley, who is a left-wing historian. Listen to this when they explain why the trial is necessary, even though everybody knows what the outcome is going to be.
Explain what you mean when you say that, the importance of this, even if there is another acquittal, is creating a historical record for the future.
It's absolutely everything. I've been reminding people at the end of World War II in 1945, when Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, went to the death camps, the Holocaust camps of Europe, the dead. And
okay. He says, I've been reminding people that Dwight Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander at the end of the Second World War, went to the death camps. And now when you hear a historian start out by talking about Nazis and death camps, you know it's not going to end well.
Immediately, the first thing he did was write a letter to General George Marshall that said, don't document everything. We need film footage. We need photographs. I want everything covered because people will claim it's a hoax and a conspiracy.
You hear this? The reason we need to have the trial, says this historian, is because at the end of the Second World War, Dwight Eisenhower visited death camps and says, my goodness, we need to take pictures of this. We need to get footage because someday somebody's going to say, this never happened. And so what happened at the Capitol building on January 6th is similar to the Holocaust in the sense that some people later on are going to deny that it ever happened. Therefore, we have to have a trial. What?
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
But if you have Republicans who themselves are unwilling to push back, I mean, let's call them what they are. They're cowards.
And the magic word there is primary. Let Representative Glatsky know that if he doesn't stand up for internet freedom, that you will find a candidate to run against him who will. Inter-party competition. Now, some have spoken of the need for a new political party because they're so disgusted by the inside the Beltway country club Republican sellouts. That would be a tragic mistake. I just wrote a piece for The Spectator explaining why we don't need a new party. There are a number of legal barriers to a new party because the laws regarding ballot access were written by Republicans and Democrats working together. Your candidate will never get into the presidential debates as sponsored by the Commission on Presidential Debates, which is not a commission. It's not appointed by the president, and it's most certainly not about debate. If so, the Green Party and Libertarian Party candidates should have been in the last debate. They were on the ballot in enough states to theoretically get 270 electoral votes. Yet another obstacle to a new party. The other problem you have is that the lamest Republican in America, the lamest Republican nominee begins with 35% of the vote. The lamest Democrat nominee in America begins with somewhere between 38 and 40% of the vote. And then you build from there. Running in a new party, you start at 0.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
This is Lanhee Chen of the Hoover Institution for townhall.com. The Biden administration announced in their first week that the U.S. is rejoining the World Health Organization. But the WHO is a flawed group, one that has performed poorly while the world has struggled with COVID-19. Early on, the group was far too deferential to China, even parroting Beijing's early claim that the virus could not be transmitted between humans. Since then, an independent panel concluded that the WHO dithered in its response, waiting too long to
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. One of my kids' birthdays today. Now that my youngest child is 30, I'm really starting to feel like I might actually be heading into middle age. Welcome back. I'm Hugh. I have a theory that you always think of yourself at that age at which you first assumed serious responsibility. So if you had serious responsibility when you were 10, you're always going to be 10 in your mind, like, you know, your dad or your mom died and you had to take care of your brothers and sisters. You're always going to feel young. And if you were loafing around the house at 50, you're going to think of yourself at 50. I mean, you're going to get old in a hurry. Responsibility keeps you young early. That's why you want to give it to your kids. I got 3 great kids, but the youngest is now, as of today, 30. Wow. Let's check the markets because that'll change my brooding on that fact. This is brought to you by our wonderful sponsors, AndrewandTodd.com, Andrew Del Rey, Todd Avakian. You know, I often tell you, but I don't emphasize enough, how long and how well I have known Andrew Del Rey. More than 20 years. We were in a Bible study together for many years when I lived in California. And his partner, Todd, I've known now for 8 years. They're both great Christian men. They run a terrific shop. They have great people working with them. And they will take care of you. They're an office of Sierra Pacific, but you want to deal with them. You want to go to andrewandtodd.com. You want to call them at 888-888-1172. No matter what your real estate question is, no matter what you think you might want to do, before you do it, before you talk to anybody else, talk to my friends whom you can trust. And in this business, that is not easily a given. You could end up with some people that you can't trust. So do what I did. Borrow, get your loan from andrewandtodd.com. Dwayne just did it. Everybody I know has done it. My family members have done it. Indeed, the 30-year-old did it. I only recommend what I use. I use andrewandtodd.com. Yesterday, Dow was up 61 points. The NASDAQ was off 35, and the S&P was down 1. Overseas this morning, everything is green. Japan, Hong Kong, England, and Germany. Gold is up a little bit. Interest rates went down just a touch, but oil is at $58 a barrel, which has been going up, up, up since Joe Biden was elected. We're about to spend another $2 trillion that we don't have, so we're going to print it. And when we print it, we increase the deficit. And unless every economist I've ever known, talked to, studied, read, and I'm not an economist, nor did I stay at a Holiday Inn, but they all say the same thing. If you increase the money supply radically, inflation follows. When inflation follows, interest rates rise. When interest rates rise, your house becomes more expensive to buy or refinance. So don't wait another day. Go and get your loan from andrewandtodd.com. I wanted to play for you earlier Anderson Cooper last night on CNN, cut number 6.
You know, and we've seen it in Bosnia, we've seen it in Rwanda, where radio was telling people that, you know, Hutus were telling the radio listeners that Tutsi were cockroaches, for, you know, getting them ginned up for genocide. And you see it in these videos where people who claim they are patriots are in the face of a police officer calling him, you know, as we're seeing it right there, and you know, gouging out the eye of one, you know, squeezing one in, you know, suffocating one in a doorway.
Now, Anderson is a friend of mine or a colleague. I worked with him extensively during the 2016 cycle, and he's very, very smart. So sometimes we all say things on the air that we haven't thought through. And the idea that the demonstration and the rioters and the insurrectionists have anything in common with people calling genocide is absurd and ridiculous. It's also, by the way, deeply injurious to their due process rights because Anderson has a huge audience And he is telling that huge audience that the demonstrators, the rioters, the insurrectionists, all of them who entered the Capitol, now I think they all ought to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. None of them can be charged with genocide. Only a handful of them can be charged with murder. Only a handful of them can be charged with felony murder, which is to be involved in any crime that results in the murder of an innocent person. None of them can be charged with genocide. It's just silly, and American media has lost their mind. And so please, you smart people, don't stop being smart. Try and understand and state accurately what happened and stick to the facts. We don't need overstatement. I'll be right back with Andy Slavitt of the White House and Lanhee Chen. We're talking COVID on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
If you're an attorney, is there a job more important than this one? I mean, is it more prestigious than to defend any president in a Senate impeachment trial? Bruce Castor, again, video cut 1, play cut.
House managers who spoke earlier were brilliant speakers. And I made some notes, and they'll hear about what I think about some of the things they said later when I'm closing the case. But I thought they were brilliant speakers, and I loved listening to them. And they're smart fellas.
Okay, I'm going to get preachy now. Don't ever, if you are in a setting, whether it's a high school debate club or the most important trial of the century, the second impeachment of a president who happens to have left office, don't sing the praises of the other team. How you love listening to them and how great they were. Unless, can you guess? Unless you're better than them. If you're going to crush them with your rhetoric, with your argument, with your evidence, with your style, with your tone, with your delivery, then you can do it. Then you can risk it. Even then, not advisable.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
What's with these Republicans? I would just give $1 and a donut to figure out what's in the mind of somebody like Senator Bill Cassidy. Here's cut 5. This is the same guy who was last week, just the other day, on with Meet the Press and Chuck Todd.
The president wasn't there. He wasn't allowed counsel. They didn't amass evidence. In 5 hours, they kind of judged, and boom, he's impeached. Now, I'm told that under the Watergate, under the Clinton impeachments, there were truckloads of information. Here, it was a video. There was no process. I mean, it's almost like, if it happened in the Soviet Union, you would have called it a show trial.
That's the guy. That was last week. That's the guy who yesterday voted with the Democrats to proceed with the trial because he didn't like Bruce Castor. And listen, Bruce Castor did a terrible job. President Trump was said to be very angry behind the scenes. Fox News quotes sources as saying Trump was furious and beyond angry over his defense team's showing on day 1 of his second impeachment trial, despite his ultimate acquittal almost certain. The sources who spent time with President Trump said he was particularly incensed with the effort thus far by his attorney, Bruce Castor. Do you get the feeling that the reason he hasn't had a strong showing by his lawyers is because no attorney wants to touch this thing?
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
We already know that tech companies were interfering in the 2020 election significantly. Little did we know there was both private and public pressure to have the tech companies act as political referees to the benefit of Joe Biden and the Democrats. The most interfered with election in American history. Let me say that again. It was the most interfered with election in American history. From the private interests to the tech interests to the changing of how we do voting in this country, it was as if it was the first election in American history, because every election before it was done in completely different ways. But these tech companies have incredible influence over Congress. They give millions of dollars through lobbying and direct contributions to be able to dictate the legislative agenda and the regulatory agenda. Remember, President Donald Trump, as one of the last things he did as president, tried to get Section 230 removed as part of the National Defense Bill. Congress wanted nothing to do with it. Would have been a great time to hold these tech companies accountable. In a bizarre and stunning turn of events, if Congress would have repealed Section 230, Facebook could have been sued for not monitoring the violence that these rioters were planning on Facebook.
Welcome back. I'm Hugh Hewitt, America. This is a special couple of segments of the Hugh Hewitt Show. I'm joined by Andrew Slavitt. Andy is an American businessman, healthcare advisor who served as the administrator of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services under President Obama. He is now a senior advisor to the White House COVID-19 response under President Biden. And Lanhee Chen is the David and Diane Steffy Fellow in American Public Policy at Stanford Hoover Institution. He also teaches at Hoover Law School. Andy's one of those annoying Wharton, Harvard Business School types, and Lanhee's one of those annoying triple Harvard undergrad, Harvard Law, Harvard Business School. But together they're a pretty smart couple of guys, and they are on top of what's going on with COVID. And I wanted to do a nonpartisan review of where we are right now. And Andy and Lanhee together have done this before, and they graciously agreed to join me. Thank you both. Andy, since you're new to the show for the first time, let me begin with you. Would you give people just a brief thumbnail of your background in healthcare policy and how you came to be on the White House Task Force?
Sure, and thanks for having me on, Hugh, and it's good to be with you, Lanhee, again. I was an entrepreneur in healthcare. I started a company after my college roommate died unexpectedly, and I sold that company eventually to United Health Group, a big healthcare company. And I was, technology, data, other things. I joined the Obama administration really as an operator to lead the turnaround after the failed healthcare.gov rescue. So I'm more of a operator than I am a political hack. And then I served in running Medicare and Medicaid. And as you said, came back now when to help the effort, because I think there's some similarities in terms of kind of operating chops you need in order to get vaccinations out to more Americans.
And Andy, how big is the COVID response team in the Biden White House, and who is on it, and how does it operate?
Well, as you know, Hewitt, in government, you get a lot of experts. They're everywhere. They're in, the Department of Defense, Department of Health and Human Services, et cetera. If you want to know something about a topic, there's someone who knows it. What you often don't have is a coordinating function, someone who can really connect the tissue of the different agencies and make people go fast. So the team, that's what the team in the White House is for. It's run by a guy named Jeff Zients, who is also a business person and a very good leader. We've got about 35 people, and we're doing everything from trying to procure more tests to figure out how to open schools, to obviously procure and purchase more vaccines, and many other activities in between, and trying to really coordinate the agencies, the FDA, the CDC, the NIH, so that they don't operate in their little silos, but they work together to try to get this done for the public.
Lanhee, Chen, people who have listened to my show for years have heard you often. You're a member of the Salem editorial board. You're a friend of mine. You teach up at Hoover. We overlook your Harvard Law School education. What is your background in healthcare policy, specifically as we go forward into the specifics of the COVID response today?
Well, Hugh, first of all, thanks for doing this. This is a great service that you're providing to the American people. I have long been involved in many of the biggest health policy debates in our country. As you noted, I'm a fellow at the Hoover Institution, but before getting here to study and really work on healthcare issues, I was a senior appointee at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in the administration before Andy, actually, when George W. Bush was president. I served at the Department of Health and Human Services and worked on a variety of different issues. You know, one of the issues we worked on in the Bush administration actually was pandemic response. We had to deal, of course, at that time with a flu pandemic. And those sorts of issues were front and center during the Bush administration, in part because President George W. Bush had a keen awareness of the challenge that would be created by health pandemics. So after spending that time in government, as I noted, I've been involved in a variety of different efforts on the policy and political side that have been focused on improving the American healthcare system. And as you said, for the last couple of years, I've been here at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University, where most of my work focuses on the American healthcare system. And so the last couple of years have been doing that. And then over the course of the last year, have been involved in advising states and the federal government on how we can respond and react to the COVID-19 crisis. And it's really been a remarkable challenge for our country, but one that I'm hopeful actually now that we can beat back here in the next couple months. It's going to be a tremendous accomplishment for us all, but it's going to require us to work together.
And as people who listen to the radio show know, but maybe not those who listen to this podcast and this YouTube presentation, from the first story in Wuhan, I have been pounding this drum about awareness of the threat because I read The Great Influenza when George Bush carried it around back in the days when Lanhee was there. I've always been aware of the threat. And I have a brother who's a research toxicologist who has warned me forever about this. And so now we're living the nightmare, and early warnings such as those that I gave and others gave went unheeded. And unfortunately, we are where we are. Where we are is 65,972,000 doses of vaccine delivered, 44,769 doses administered, and 33,783 doses received twice, or people have twice in the United States. Andy Slavitt, where are we, do you think, in percentage terms of the effort, not in terms of the number of people, we can do the calculation against 330 million, but in percentage terms of the cycle to get the vaccine to everyone who will take it?
Yeah, well, faster, but not fast enough. I'd say, over the last 3 weeks, we've increased vaccination deliveries to states by about 30%. We've also, as of today, opened the retail pharmacy program where we're shipping directly to retail pharmacies. FEMA is standing up 100 community health centers. We found more vaccinators. But all of that is to say that there's still way more demand than there is supply of vaccine. There probably will be for the next several weeks and maybe even a bit longer. So we're working with the two manufacturers to get even more doses created. I think they would tell you that they're in a place, this is Pfizer and Moderna, where they've got their manufacturing figured out. There are still some bottlenecks. This is not like producing shoes. This is not a kind of just mass production. This is, taking, biological substances and very sensitive liquids and then putting them in vials and so forth, which is a lot, as I learn every day, there's a real science to it. And then we've got another vaccine potentially to be approved by the FDA around the corner, hopefully. I think that may be the end of February or early January, knock on wood. And then I think you're going to start to see things really accelerate. My sense is, without predicting the future, that March will show really significant gains every week over week, until such time as we get into the spring and most Americans who want shots, the vaccine, should hopefully be able to get it.
Now, Andy, in Israel, which is ahead of us in terms of their distribution grid, they have now experienced a situation where they have more supply than daily demand. which is a great situation to both be in and a perilous situation because not enough people are lining up. When do you expect, best guess, obviously we can't hold you, to be in that situation where everyone who wants a vaccine can find and access a vaccine? Do you think it's actually April, May?
Yes. So this is a completely unauthorized prediction, since I'm not. There's too many things, too many factors to predict. But I think that's about right. Look, it's a state-by-state decision on when they allow different groups in, and the states are getting better at doing this. I think my sense is that many or most of them will be opening up, in the spring, late spring, to all Americans who want a vaccine, so they can get one. And I'll tell you, we're already beginning to deal with, even as you deal with supply problems, we are also beginning to deal with the conversations that we need to have with people who are pretty sure they want to take the vaccine but have questions or may not be so sure. And that happens in different pockets and different communities, so it's not evenly across the board.
That's going to be my second topic to close out the first one. I want to get Lanhee's estimate of when we cross that available supply and people in line demand point, as Israel has done. Are you as optimistic as Andy is, maybe April, maybe May, when there will be a vaccine for everyone who wants it?
Yeah, I think, Hugh, that's right. I mean, my sense is that right now the situation is improving on a day-to-day basis. And the addition, Andy mentioned we're probably going to have a third vaccine here from Johnson & Johnson and Janssen Pharmaceuticals available here, hopefully within a matter of a few weeks. And I think that's also going to help because that particular vaccine only requires one dose as opposed to the 2-dose formulations we have that are available now. So I think that's going to help a lot. And I do think, I am hopeful by the time we get to the late spring, we will be able to have a lot of supply available, plentiful supply, hopefully, for people who do want the vaccine. And that is really going to be the key to getting us out of this pandemic. Absolutely.
All right, now let's turn to the second biggest issue. Supply is the first issue because you can't ask the second question until you've got a supply. Let's talk about safety. Andy Slavitt, what is your estimate of the safety of the vaccine?
Well, so I've spent a fair amount of time talking to the FDA folks and the CDC folks, and gratefully, the instances of an adverse event are both extremely rare and have always, so far, at least, only been temporary. I think it's the job of the FDA to report each of these events, to investigate them, and to be very public about them and to try to understand them. But, as one of the, Peter Marks, who's one of the career leaders inside the FDA, has said, these vaccines really are miracles. You almost never see vaccines that have this level of efficacy and this level of safety. In the history of vaccination, almost, I think the number is something like 90+%, Lanhee might know it, of adverse events occur within the first 2 months. So some people criticized the FDA at the time for taking a little bit longer to make sure that the 2 months pass. Than Johnson, they're doing the same thing. But, I think that gives me a lot of comfort and gives a lot of people a lot of comfort. And, of course, now that you've got, 40-some, close to 50 million shots in people's arms, and we've witnessed very, very few allergic reactions. And, again, those have been temporary. So the news is great, and we got to continue to talk about it.
Lanhee, what's your assessment on the Republican side of the vaccine? Again, this is science. There's not really a Democratic or Republican side, and the official toxicologist of the Hugh Hewitt show says, take the damn thing as soon as you can. But what do you think?
Yeah, look, I think we've got a tremendous amount of data and evidence available for both of these vaccines. And when Johnson & Johnson hopefully comes online, we'll have a lot of data for that as well. And so I think it's important for people to realize that both Moderna and Pfizer, both of the vaccines that are available now, went through clinical trial processes that were very rigorous. In the last phase of those clinical trials, you're talking about tens of thousands of people. And now we have more than that. We've actually got real world evidence, for the millions of people that have gotten vaccinated. So we've been able to see. I do think it's the case that people recognize a couple things. First of all, these vaccines are incredibly protective. The levels at which they are protective against COVID-19 is truly remarkable. It's a testament, Hugh, to science. It's also a testament to government and the private sector having worked together over the course of the last several months. And in fact, over the course of the last year, this vaccine development process has been going on for a long time. And factors working together to really bring these vaccines to market, to test them, to ensure their efficacy, which, as I said, in the case of Moderna and Pfizer, is over 90%. It's really a remarkable accomplishment. And the other thing I'll just say is that it is the case that both of these vaccines are effective. It is the case that the folks have been taking them effectively, and we're not seeing the kinds of severe adverse reactions that personally I'd be worried about. And I think that's something for people to know.
And Andy, I want to go back to something you said. I believe it would be very important for any adverse reaction that resulted in death to be publicized and put into context and put against the number of 44,769 doses delivered. But we don't have one yet that's been fully investigated. I know there's been a case, a couple of suspicious ones. Does the Biden administration agree that every adverse morbid event has to be publicized and talked about?
Yes, absolutely. And we began Monday, Wednesday, Friday public briefings where we take open questions from the press. We have the head of the CDC and the head of the NIAID, Dr. Fauci, on, and they take any question that comes their way. And what the head of the CDC, Dr. Walensky, has said is that she's committed to me that she will address every issue with regarding any adverse event, because the things that get in the way sometimes are rumors. Sometimes those rumors are started innocently, or people have some fear, and so the best defense against that is having just a candid dialogue. I would say one thing, if you don't mind, I would say one quick thing to pick up on what Lanhee said. I hope that when this story is written, this will be a great American success story, begun in one administration, completed in the next administration. Amazing innovation out of American scientists in the private sector, aided by smart thinking from the public sector, something that everybody can take credit for, put their hands in and say they had a hand in this success, including, by the way, all the Americans out there who have been struggling through this whole crisis. So, this has been a very challenging year. This can end on a very positive note with, I think, something that everybody has a chance to feel good about.
I agree, if we get people to take the vaccine. And I'm going to get to that part in a second, but a quick technical question, Andy. Will AstraZeneca, the Oxford vaccine that has been developed in the UK and is being widely used in Europe, be made available in the United States, or are we dividing up the world? And when do you expect Johnson & Johnson to come online? And will it be, in your view, as efficacious as the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines? A lot there, so I'll let you unpack it as you'd like.
Let me take it in order of chronology. Johnson & Johnson is going to be, they've submitted an emergency use authorization. People are poring over the data right now. They're meeting at the end of February, and they'll make a decision. And if it goes our way, knock on wood, we could be at the very end of February, very beginning of March, in a situation where we have a third vaccine that, as Lanhee said, has a single dose requirement, doesn't have all of the different cold chain requirements. Now, that vaccine, as people have, I think, seen, the headline number relative to Moderna and Pfizer is that it has a lower efficacy rate. So in the 70s in the U.S. versus in the 90s. But I think what's important to realize, we may have done ourselves a disservice by focusing so much on the incredible success of the Moderna and Pfizer, is that when you look at not the success rate of the vaccine, but the success rate of the vaccine against severe disease, basically meaning something that would require a hospitalization or a death, there were no deaths or hospitalizations in the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So if I were offered the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, I would feel the exact same way about it as if I were offered the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine. I don't mind dealing with a cold. I don't think most of us are too concerned about COVID-19 if it results in some mild symptoms. What we are concerned about is dying and going to the hospital and being on a ventilator and all of those unpleasant things. And under that score, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine data so far has been very strong. But we will see. There's more data there, and we will see what the FDA says. I don't want to get ahead of them. We'll let them do their jobs and come out with whatever they have to say about it. In terms of AstraZeneca, that's behind. Johnson & Johnson by a few months. I don't know the outcome of that. I will say that it will be probably, my understanding is later in the spring before they even submit an EUA. We have gone ahead, though, before this. This is important for the audience to know. And we have procured enough vaccines for every adult American, even before taking into account the Johnson & Johnson or the AstraZeneca or any other vaccine. And the reason is we want to be prepared for every situation and every contingency. And if something happens with the data and Johnson & Johnson's delayed, we want to be sure that we have enough vaccines to vaccinate the public, and we do.
So, Lanhee, I now want to turn to you as an international healthcare policy expert. Obviously, with 400 affiliates across the United States, I mostly have Americans listening, but millions of those Americans have family around the world, right? They're worried about Mexico. They're worried about Europe. They're worried about Australia and Japan. They're worried about China. When does American capacity and European capacity begin to make a sizable dent in the world population about which we are genuinely concerned?
Yeah, Hugh, this is a really good question. I mean, the challenge we have is that this is truly a global pandemic. It's not an American problem. It's not a European problem. We're seeing the incidence of COVID-19 all over the world, and it is going to require some cooperation between countries. Each individual regulatory authority is responsible for clearing this vaccine in their own way. And different countries have different vaccines they're working with. As you noted, the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine is very common in Europe. It is also common in other parts of the world as well. There's a vaccine, there's actually 3 vaccines that have been developed by China with various efficacies. The Russians have their own vaccine. There are a series of, in India, there's a vaccine as well. So there's in order to defeat this pandemic, it is going to require different countries to come together and recognize the value of promoting vaccinations to try to inoculate against this disease. I want to come back to something Andy said, though, which is really important. And that is that the purpose of these vaccines is not necessarily, and I mean this globally, not necessarily just to avoid COVID-19 entirely. It's to avoid the variability that comes with COVID-19. In other words, people that are, otherwise relatively healthy, showing up with very, very severe symptoms in the hospital, or God forbid, in some cases, actually dying from this. That's what we're trying to avoid. And the vaccines that I've seen here in the United States, certainly, but also abroad as well, the clinical evidence that we're seeing so far is that they can be pretty effective at avoiding those outcomes. And that's really what we're trying to do, not just here in the U.S., but around the world.
All right, let me begin to go down a couple of the quick questions that I get all the time. And I try as a journalist to stay on top of this, but you two are the experts. Andy, should people who are eligible for the vaccine, who have in fact already had the virus, receive the vaccine?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. They should. I know people who have had the virus and they have had the vaccine. We know a little bit more about how the immunity works with the vaccine than we do when people acquire it naturally. We know there's something that people refer to as waning immunity, which means that over time, that immunity profile changes. So absolutely, I'd say yes.
So my producer who has had COVID and was pretty sick, not in the hospital, but pretty sick, how long should he wait to get his vaccine if he becomes eligible for it? He's too young right now. Is there a period of time which the government is recommending you wait after you recover to go and get the vaccine?
That's a good. If he's done with his symptoms, then I believe he's absolutely in the clear to be able to do that. And God willing, if he's young, by the time he gets.
Oh, he's not young. He's as old as almost as old as I am. He's ancient. Let me go on to the underlying condition question, which I get a lot, and I don't know the answer. If people have underlying conditions like high blood pressure, heart disease, or morbid obesity, should they get the vaccine, Andy?
Well, even more so, because some of those conditions put you at higher risk for having for having a serious complication if you get COVID. And of course, as you said earlier, 46 million plus Americans, or 45 million plus Americans as of yesterday evening, have gotten the vaccine. Many of them older and with heart conditions and things like that. Many of them in nursing homes with multiple conditions. and that's been absolutely fine. I think what we will see, and I'm speaking very specifically to Pfizer and Moderna, that determination, should Johnson & Johnson be approved, will be separately determined when that one comes out.
All right. Now, are vaccines free? If people are out of money, and many people are, and they don't have health insurance, can they get the vaccine?
Absolutely. Free. There's the behind the scenes, an administration fee is paid by the government to the people who administer the vaccine. So we pay for the labor. People don't have to worry about that. And the vaccine itself, the substance, was already purchased thanks to Congress for the public.
Last in a sequence, how long will the immunity gain by either Pfizer or Moderna last?
We don't know, and we can't know. So we have to be very honest and not sugarcoat answers. We don't know, and it probably doesn't make sense to speculate. I have heard people speculate everything from. I think one of the CEOs of the pharmaceutical companies said they think it'll be every year. I've heard some say it could be less frequently than that. And, this depends on these new variants and how quickly they progress in some parts.
I'm coming to the variant shortly, but Lanhee, I went through a lot of questions there with Andy. Do you have any comments on what he had to say?
No, I think Andy addressed all of those. The one point I want to underscore is that people who do have pre-existing conditions, such as diabetes, such as heart disease, that might make them more at risk for adverse outcomes because of COVID-19, it is particularly important for them to have the vaccine. And in fact, all the data we have so far suggests that's a very, very important thing to do to prevent the onset of severe COVID-19. These vaccines can do that. They can help ensure that doesn't happen. They can't guarantee it, obviously. We can't guarantee anything in life, but certainly they can help folks. And I think it's important for folks in those situations to really get this vaccine as soon as they're able.
So, Andy, how does an 18-year-old, say, with juvenile diabetes get proof that will allow them to get into line and get an appointment when most of the computer programs I have seen, and I am 64 and 3 weeks, so I'm following this pretty closely. You can't get in unless you're 65. How do they get permission to get a vaccine?
So one of the things I'd point to is that every state has a different list of who is eligible for a vaccine right now. And there are probably, I'm estimating 8 to 10 states where someone who is younger but has a pre-existing condition qualifies. In other states, some states it's based strictly on age, and some it's based on job type, first responders, in some cases teachers, and others. So it's a really potpourri. If you want to find out in your state, I think you can go to the Kaiser Family Foundation website, which has a list of who's eligible in each state. And then, each state is requiring underneath that making their own rules for how people would demonstrate that. Is it the honor system? Is it mail from a doctor, or so forth? So my advice is either check your own state website, check this Kaiser Family Foundation website.
So, Lanhee, I know you have children, so I want to put the next question to you. Israel has begun to vaccinate to the age of 16. What is your understanding of children and vaccines right now, not including any variants that have not yet been understood and studied?
Currently the vaccines are not indicated. In other words, the FDA has not approved their usage for, in one case under the age of 16, in the other case under the age of 18, in terms of Pfizer and Moderna. So at this point, kids, do not have access to the vaccine and in fact are not taking the vaccine. That may change as we go on. As I understand it, and Andy probably knows better about this, but both manufacturers, I think, are engaging in the clinical trial process to ensure the efficacy and safety of the vaccines for those under the age of 16 or 18 respectively. And I think it's important we let that process play out. Right now, the focus of these vaccines is the adult population, and in particular, ensuring that older Americans, those, as Andy noted, in various states that are able to get the vaccine, are getting it and are getting access to it. That is the focus right now.
Now, Andy Slavitt of the White House COVID Task Force, I have read, and you can tell me if I am wrong, that the resistance to the vaccine is greatest among two groups: rural Americans and African Americans. And I don't know why that is. I don't need to speculate about that. But if that is correct, how will you address it? And if it's not correct, feel free to tell me I'm wrong.
Sure. So it's interesting. The closer I get into this, the more I struggle with even the word resistance. And what I really think we have is people who have very legitimate questions that they want answered before they take the vaccine. Of course, there are some people who are just not supportive of vaccines under any circumstances, any vaccine. That turns out to be a relatively small number. In the case of COVID-19, I think you have people who would crawl over broken glass to get the vaccine. Maybe the three of us are in that category. And then I think you have some people who are in the category of saying, hey, maybe I don't know if I want to go first, or I have a couple of legitimate questions I have to get answered. Those do tend to be different in different communities. I think the two you identified probably both have slightly larger sets of groups that have those types of questions, although, those are the questions that probably everybody has. It's interesting the way the human mind works. I think it is possible to have two thoughts in your brain at the same time, one being, hey, why can't I get my vaccine earlier? And the second being, hey, I've got some questions about this vaccine. So that's very legitimate, very reasonable, and I think to be expected. And we have to just do a good job of having a conversation and a dialogue, getting people's questions answered, pointing them to reliable resources, not allowing Twitter or TikTok or Facebook somewhere to give people unreliable answers to their questions. And I think, which is why I'm very grateful you're having Lanhee and I on the show today, because I think getting the people authoritative, actual facts is really, really important.
Well, then let's move to herd immunity, because there are many people who wonder what it is, when it will be achieved, and how long it will last. So I'll let you swing at that, Andy Slavitt. What's your understanding on that question?
I think I'm going to take a pitch here because, and I'll tell you why. What I can tell you is how much supply we'll have, and I can estimate, as we've tried to do, how quickly we'll have that supply. And there the story is getting better, never fast enough, but getting better. What I can't estimate are two things. One is exactly how many people will take the vaccine and how quickly. So if, in fact, we have enough supply, but only, say, half the people in the country take it, and that would make it very hard to predict. I also can't predict how much the variants are going to be spreading, and how well and how quickly the vaccines will work against every possible variant. I think we know some of the answers to that, but when you put all of that together, it is very perilous to predict when we will be at herd immunity, other than to say as soon as damn possible.
No, Andy and Lanhee, the one time I've interviewed Dr. Fauci on the show, I asked him a question, it was back in February, that the 1918 virus iterated 12 times over the summer of 1918 and emerged deadlier. What was he seeing? He said, that's a great question. We don't know. And so that was early on. Do we know about these variants in any sort of way that alarms you, Andy, beyond the ordinary alarm that would arrive with any virus? And in specific terms, is there anything that alarms you about children? Because if it turns towards children, the world changes in a heartbeat.
Well, so yeah, my job is probably to be in a state of alarm and playing through bad scenarios and trying to plan for those scenarios, even hoping many of them don't come to fruition. I think these variants are not good news. I think these variants suggest that there is enough multiplication of this virus out here that the virus is going to go through this evolutionary path more quickly than we had hoped to try to resist where it can. Now, the good news is that the major variant, the one coming out of England, UK, the one they call B117, the vaccine and human immunity seems to hold up very well against that. There are other mutations where there's been more than one mutation to the spike protein, as has happened in South Africa, this happened in Brazil, where the vaccine is still effective but less effective, and where there's some evidence that pre-existing immunity doesn't work and doesn't hold. So these are signs that we are going to be, like with the flu, facing something that will continue to change on us. most of these changes are completely harmless and completely irrelevant. Most of these changes, and this virus has been evolving this whole time in front of our eyes, have had no real impact. But occasionally they do. And that just means our science needs to be better. And one thing I can tell you from being in here is I am a lot less scared the more I see what our science can do. I talk to the pharmaceutical companies multiple times a week about this very thing. And, I am so grateful to say that they're on top of it. They are already working on how to address these mutations. And, there will be an ongoing battle here. And that's what we know today. We will know a lot more in a year than we know right now, but we know more than we did a year ago for sure.
Now, Lanhee, this is a political question, so I don't want to put Andy on the spot as a member of the administration. But we have learned today from reporting in the Financial Times that cases of the virus may have appeared up to 8 weeks earlier than had previously been disclosed by the Chinese Communist Party. Do you have any confidence at all that they have learned to disclose variants if they arise in the PRC, and that around the world, everyone will be in disclosure mode immediately on variants?
I do believe they'll be in disclosure mode. The question of how quickly they disclose it is in my mind, an open one. I have grave concerns about how the Chinese government, how the Chinese Communist Party handled the start of this pandemic. I know that there is an investigation that's been underway that the World Health Organization has led. That's not an investigation that I personally have great faith in, because I don't believe that the Chinese government has been forthcoming. So I'm hopeful that they understand that this is a serious pandemic, that it's important that the world know what they know as soon as possible, because that is the key to us fighting, additional mutations, as Andy noted of this, is that people are forthcoming and that we're able to have science respond to these things. It is in not only their interest, but the interest of the rest of the world. But I think it's deeply disappointing and concerning how the Chinese government handled this at the outset, and the way in which the World Health Organization did not play a constructive role, at least early on. Those are things I personally am very worried about, and that I hope the message has been delivered. I hope that the president delivers that message to the Chinese, that it's incredibly important for them to work together with the rest of the world on this, because it's not just about their fates, it's the fates of us all. And if they're not able to do that, then, we're going to have a problem.
Now, Andy, I want to go back to the issue of comorbidities, and here social media has done a great disservice, because I've tried to follow it as closely as possible, and I see lots of misleading data on comorbidities, lots of accusations that the death toll is inflated, and I don't think it's a particularly relevant statistic, because I know people myself who have died from COVID and have had no comorbidities, and I know people who've died with comorbidities. Death is death. But what is your understanding? Can you shine some light on the idea of COVID doesn't hurt you unless you have a pre-existing condition? I don't believe that's true, but what is the government's position on your understanding on that question?
Yeah. So here's what we know. We know that if you're older, you're at higher risk. We know that if you have a comorbidity, an underlying condition like diabetes, like high blood pressure, that you are at higher risk. We know that if you're male, you're at slightly higher risk. We also know, oddly, that if you're young and extremely healthy, you're in a different kind of risk. I have a 19-year-old who is an athlete and who is in far better shape than his dad ever had been in his life, and he got COVID and has had a very, very tough time with it. This was months ago, and he still hasn't entirely back to himself. And there's something strange that goes on with people who have really good immune systems and are really good shape and are younger. He's not the only one. We've learned unfortunately a lot more about this. People who have high exposure, who are in job types. I mean, this is very much of an occupational disease. If you are working in a meatpacking plant, if you're living in a communal setting, if you're working in a grocery store, you are much higher risk. If you're working in farm labor group, so there are things that make you much more exposed, which is why people are advised, wear masks, try to avoid large crowds, et cetera. You'll lower your risk. But of course, if you look at the tables, as you get older and older, or as you get sicker and sicker, or as your job type gets you more and more exposed, you are indeed at higher risk. And so the final point I want to make here is even if you personally don't feel like you're at high risk, you are at high risk of being a spreader because when there's community spread, eventually these things work their way into nursing homes and communal settings, et cetera. So you may personally not feel at risk, but maybe someone you know becomes at risk because of you, and very likely someone you don't know could end up being at risk because you've been part of the chain of spreading it.
Now, Andy, let me stay on that for a second. The world's greatest defensive end in the NFL, Myles Garrett, got COVID in the middle of the season. And while he returned after 2 games missed or 3 games missed, he freely admitted he never got back to his all-pro form before that. It lasted, like your son. It lasted. What is the understanding right now, or does science simply not yet know the consequences of COVID long term? Because if it doesn't, that's another great spur to get the vaccine, because you really don't want to be part of that test cohort.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't know. And it's a question that people who are dealing with and still dealing with this bout face and are, quite loud and vocal as they should be about trying to get answers. In many cities around the country, they're opening up these COVID treatment centers for people who have had long-term conditions. In some part, they're trying to find commonality and things that work. In some part, they're trying to learn and get as much data as possible. But it's a mystery. And, these viruses, as we know from SARS and MERS, et cetera, they can kind of hide out in your body in different places and lay dormant and continue to rear up. These viruses are not super straightforward. And it's also not common sense how your immune system responds. Your immune system it's an amazing thing, but it isn't highly predictable in terms of how it reacts to these viruses. And in some cases, it overreacts, and in some cases, it can get fooled. We really need to unpack this mystery. And to your point about the vaccine, I not only do I not want to die, I don't want to be long-term sick either.
Now, Lanhee, I want to go to the idea of 100-year events, because I don't want people to develop a false sense of security about this. This is a 100-year event, but having done land use forever, that doesn't mean another one can't happen next year. It just means over the course of 200 years, you'll get 2 events, and they could be back-to-back. What do you think, since we've had SARS and MERS and now COVID and H1N1, what is going on, and how the world to prepare to do this more frequently than we have done it any time in human history?
Well, Hugh, let's start with the good news first. The good news is that the more we encounter these kind of respiratory diseases, the better able we are to respond and react. And by the way, to see the first signs of a problem. There's been a lot of conversation about how some countries in Asia have handled the pandemic very well. South Korea has been discussed. Taiwan has been discussed. Part of the reason why they were able to do better is because they had firsthand experience with SARS, which was the severe acute respiratory syndrome, sort of the cousin, if you will, of COVID-19. They saw that pandemic go through Asia several years ago. And so they had the opportunity to use that time to see what they needed to do to prepare, to see, for example, the value and importance of social distancing policies when the virus is first spreading, to see the value and importance of masking, to understand some of the science behind this. So in that sense, even though this has been an awful last year for the pandemic here in the U.S., we have this experience now, and that experience is tremendously helpful as we go forward and deal with further, particularly respiratory style pandemics. But the reality is, you're right, Hugh, which is that, things in the natural world are happening that we don't have control over. And so it is entirely possible. In fact, the data tells us it's likely that we're going to see another pandemic at some point over the course of, whatever period of time it is. And so it's important for us to do a couple of things. First of all, to ensure that we're investing in the right technologies, to ensure that we're investing in what we need to have a public health infrastructure that allows us to respond to these kinds of things. And when we can, to cooperate with other countries to make sure that we are working together to identify these things as they first happen so that we can respond to them effectively and well, because an early response and an aggressive response is going to be the best way to deal with these future pandemics.
Now, I also know from the data that podcasts run out of time between 45 and 60 minutes. People stop listening. So I want to get to one more question and then ask you both to reiterate the key points. My last question, a public policy question, Andy. I spent last week on Skid Row in downtown Los Angeles, which has the highest concentration of homeless people in the United States. It's an absolutely devastated area. I was double masked, I was gloved, I was as careful as I could, but I still thought I was sitting in the middle of a petri dish of virus because there was a federal court hearing that I had to attend. The homeless seem to me to be a particularly vulnerable community. Does your task force have anything in mind for them?
Well, Hugh, this is a very astute question. Although I think to the premise of your question, that my understanding is that Hugh Hewitt listeners would listen all day long if you ran the podcast all day long. So you may have to test that sometime. But maybe not with me as a guest. Yes, the answer is yes. We are opening up special centers and mobile vaccination capabilities as our state that we are helping to fund in these communities, focused on a couple of really targeted groups. You mentioned one, which is the homeless, but also farm labor camps, really problematic. Other congregate settings where people are just forced to live in close quarters. We forget about those, but there's many people who are living in those kinds of situations. They are at very high risk, and so this is part of our more places and more mobile and bring vaccines to people, because you can't expect everybody to be able to make their way to Yankee Stadium or where have you.
So Andy, in your before we go closing statement, is it completely apolitical? I think the most important thing is that everyone believe everything is apolitical. That is my belief. I think the scientists, because I've got scientists in the family, are doing the best they can as fast as they can with a virus that has never been dealt with before, with the best intention. I think every governor is doing the best that they can, though some have made mistakes and some have made wise decisions. I actually think everyone's trying to do the best they can. Is that your understanding?
Yes. So look, I am a Democrat, although as I said earlier, I'm not extremely political. And the first week into the Trump administration's response, I called the White House, spoke to Jared Kushner. Lanhee and I spoke pretty frequently. We got in front of the Congress to answer questions as someone who comes from on the left side and the right side of the political aisle. And, you're hearing very little difference in terms of what Lanhee and I are saying here, which doesn't mean that we agree on every topic. It just means that when it comes to saving lives, it's a no-brainer. And we all ought to separate some of the things that we put into our own identity, who we are, how we describe ourselves, from the basic fundamental work that we have to do to say, hey, let's come together and beat this thing. Let's all take credit for it. Let's all suffer as we are when it's not working. We can be proud coming out of this moment. And I do think that while we try to put a political lens on many things, this is one that hopefully should escape that definition.
So, Lanhee, I want to go to you for the penultimate statement. What is your general view of the situation? What is the most important piece of advice? I think it's get the vaccine, but I'll let Lanhee speak for Lanhee.
Well, I think it's been obviously a difficult last year, but as I look ahead, I am optimistic. I'm optimistic that we can beat back this pandemic, that we can do it together. This should not be a partisan issue, Hugh. I know so much in our politics, so much in our policy landscape has become polarized, but this is an area where we really can work together. And we do have the opportunity now with science, with us working together. If enough Americans can get this vaccine, we can beat this thing back. And I think it's crucially important for us now to be focused on doing what we can. And I think it's also important for us not to let down our guard at this point. It is tempting because there are vaccines out there, because people are getting vaccinated, because we are seeing immunity conferred because of it. There's a tendency to to kind of let your guard slip. And I would just say this is not the time to do that. This is the time when we need to be focused as a people to come together to get past this thing. And that means continuing to do everything we've been asked to do for the last year. And I know it's a lot. I know it's a lot for many families out there that have been suffering through this, that have had to deal with this in their own way. But, you know, we can come together and deal with this thing. Get the vaccine if it's available to you. If not, continue to do the things you need to do, and it'll be there. And the day will come when we'll all be able to be together again and do the things that we enjoy doing together.
And Andy, last word to you.
It's been a really dark kind of period. And for the first time in a while, thanks to the efforts of lots of people, we're starting to see some rays of sunshine potentially poke through. But if we've learned anything, it's that this virus is unpredictable and will likely still have more surprises in store for us. So I would underscore Lanhee's point, let's not declare victory early, and let's all recognize that we can do our part. There's something each of us can do. Obviously, taking the vaccine. I'm a big proponent of wearing a mask, but also just in general, you know, the opportunity to help others who are hurting is incredibly high right now. There's more opportunity to help people who are either having a mental health crisis or have lost their job or are in some other bit of despair or need some groceries delivered. And I think when this is all over, we're going to look back and say, wow, so many people did so many extraordinary things. And I know I'm going to kick myself every time I had an opportunity to be helpful to somebody and wasn't. So I'm going to spend the next whatever period of time it's going to take getting there, trying to do that, not just in a governmental way, because I'm here for a brief period to help out, but just in a personal way, just recognizing the need and the pain out there and trying to do something about it. And I know so many Americans are, and it's inspiring.
Andy Slavitt on the White House COVID-19 response team, Lanhee Chen at Hoover. I want to thank you both for doing this. Come back in a couple of weeks or a month, and let's do another update, and hopefully the news will continue to get better. And in the meantime, anyone who is listening, go onto your computer, make the phone calls, go get the vaccine. Don't get bored. Don't get dismayed at the fact that there's a line. Just be as steady because your life depends on it.